Hey! Hi, everybody. We're the Wednesday Club. Welcome to the Wednesday Club, I guess.
Thank you for tuning in. Talison's last words before it started was, "I'm trying to make it weird."
Yeah.
I think I succeeded.
You succeeded.
Did I succeed?
Well done.
You had me very nervous about my hair all of a sudden.
This is what we do on Critical Role is we make sure that we're as awkward as humanly possible before we start.
Oh, you don't have
the minute the camera comes up, everyone goes.
You certainly don't have to help me with that. I'm just like, the cameras are on.
We're
Which one
naturally
do I look
gifted.
at? I don't know.
Your eyes get like a Disney character. Your eyes get really big, and you get 10 years younger. It's really great. Oh yeah, look at that. He looks like a 60s Disney character. It's like he's suddenly shocked that her dress changed colors.
Yep.
Yeah. I love you.
All right. I love you too. I love doing this show. So hi everybody. We're the Wednesday Club. My name is Matt Key. I'm behind the counter today, and we are joined by our intrepid duo.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Amy Dallen.
I'm definitely intrepid. I'm Taliesin Jaffe. Welcome.
I like that. I was like, it's an intrepid duo, and Amy's like, sure. Well, yeah, I'm Amy Dallen.
I almost rolled with it. I stopped and thought about it.
Well, you have to make it awkward because that's
halfway through
what
a cartwheel.
Taliesin has to do.
It's the worst time to have a thought is halfway through a
Ooh,
cartwheel.
wait. What if? Yeah.
So welcome to our show, everybody. Hi, this camera, huh? Today, I was looking at that one, but we're at this one. No, now where are we?
The lights don't help. Camera 3 is eternally on, by the way, so the lights don't help.
Yeah.
And,
I'm looking out of the corner of my eye at the monitor, but Chief Doom, I believe, is now playing with me. Chief Doom, our engineer, our one and only wonderful engineer. Also, we have
Can we shout out this
the wonderful art of Kin Wen.
unbelievably beautiful
As
Prince
we've got
Robot the Fourth?
Prince Robot the Fourth.
I would like someone to Photoshop a Signal Boost episode into his head. That would make me really happy.
That would be great.
So-
Which episode? Do you have a specific one?
No, I'm pretty easy.
Did anybody ever actually boost Saga?
I don't think
don't think-
Saga has gotten.
I don't know that
a
it
couple
needs to be
official
boosted.
comic
It's
book.
pretty big.
Yeah.
This
Already.
is so interesting note about the books we're about to talk about. They are the paradox of comic book stardom is that Saga is one of the biggest things in the world right now. But the vast majority of humans on Earth have never heard of a comic book called Saga. And I know this in part because people walk into the store every single week who have never heard of Saga, even though it is like awards dominating, sales record setting, crazy level success.
Yeah.
We're still talking about comics. Comics itself is a huge world with a bunch of different subfields. And B, the entire comics world, especially in America, is small compared to most other things. So that is to say, everyone's reading Saga, except actually a ton of people have
Who
not
are not.
read Saga.
All right, so we should signal boost Saga.
We're doing that right now.
We're doing that right now.
That's
May I make a request that you put Liam
Signal
in the
Boost
fart
Unplugged.
dimension?
all right. Fart Dimension it is.
Because that is one of my
Signal Boost
prouder
Unplugged.
moments.
This is our unplugged episode of Signal
Yeah,
Boost.
Signal Boost Unplugged. Hey, so Taliesin, talk to me about your episode. You know what? Actually, Amy, talk to me about your
Behind
episode.
the boost?
Yeah, behind the boost.
Behind the
Behind
boost.
the boost.
I'm expecting.
Becky, why did you make me say all those mean things to you?
Because it's adorable and I love you so much. And I was like, you
pretty
know what?
adorable.
I want to see this effervescent, wonderful girl like scream at me. Like I just think that's like, I don't know. I think
No, I
that's,
get it.
there's comedy in that to me.
I
you
can
know,
show
because
up
you're not that way in any capacity. So it's playing against.
I
you.
had a whole series of outfits that would have clashed with the green screen, so I was told very powerfully not to wear.
Which is why you should wear that.
No, I know.
Yeah.
They were like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Now.
Half of Talison's shoulders just gone. We're not
So hey
getting that.
everybody,
Yep.
we're the Wednesday Club. We
We're
talk
a
comic
little-
books
we're a little
on here.
And other things. We're
And other
definitely
things,
veering
but,
a bit today. That's okay.
And that's my fault probably. I veer a lot. I'm a veerer. That's
I'm
what
going to veer
told.
one more time before we actually get into our topic, though.
Do it, veer.
Be
Veer.
Vera Lynn at this point.
Because we are talking about. I'm very excited for today's topic because it is one of my favorite authors in the universe, which I think probably both these guys might agree with. But before we
I
get
do
there,
agree that is one of your favorite authors.
yes, a statement of fact with which we can all get on board.
I feel okay with this.
We don't typically cover a ton of comics news this week, but we have to do a shout out this week.
Oh yeah.
Because it is one of the best weeks of the year that they announced the nominations for the Will Eisner Awards. The Eisner Awards are essentially the Oscars of comics. They are given out every year at San Diego Comic-Con. I think they're in like their somewhere between 25 and 30 years stream.
I missed earlier. I was trying to say they're better than the Oscars of comedy. They're like the Tony Awards of comics. It's just even better. It's even more fun.
Sure. Yeah.
They're great.
We'll talk a lot more about the Eisners. Watching them is the highlight of my con every year. Before you even worked on them.
Did you go last year? Were
Oh,
you in
yes,
the
I
audience?
did.
Oh, so you got to see.
Oh yes, I did.
Some of my jokes with John Barrowman. That was fun.
It was incredible. But you did kind of ruin like a thing that I love about the Eisners, which is that it's usually like 2 pieces of string level production quality.
Oh really?
Like
and I actually pulled together halfway.
You did a show. It was. I mean, it was amazing, and it made me very proud because I was just like, it's like a real show, guys. Because really, it's just a bunch of comic book people sort of shyly celebrating each other. Which this was not meant to be a giant diversion. We will talk about the Eisners.
It normally has the vibe of a freshman prom.
It
normally
does.
Everybody's getting up there to talk to each other, and almost none of them want attention. And like it's. But it's so much fun to be in that audience, being like, "No, we're gonna clap for you." Like, by the way, it's half empty every year. Anyone with a Comic-Con badge, I'm gonna just say it every week.
No,
everyone with a Comic-Con badge can go to the Eisners. Everybody always assumes it's like I need to buy VIP tickets, reserve in advance kind of thing. Not the case. Anyone can go who has a badge to Comic-Con, which I realize is not the widest net of people, but it's still like 150,000 people or something. Anyone can go to the Eisners. They're incredibly fun to watch. It is a boring award show, but it is the best kind of boring award show because this is where we celebrate the amazing work being done in our field. And some of it this year, done by our very own Jody Houser, whose book Faith is nominated either in Best New Series or Best Limited Series. I don't remember what category.
Is it ongoing?
Best limited series. I haven't finished reading the
I read them and then I forgot the category
I started
immediately.
and then got distracted by a park squirrel.
I'm gonna say I think it might be Best New Series.
Might be Best New Series.
For Faith, which is written by Jody Houser with art by Per Perez, I think Margaret Savage.
It's literally on the wall behind Key right now.
Published by Valiant Comics. Jody is our dear friend, and I have really enjoyed her just taking over the world piece by piece. And this is a crucial part of that journey, about which I am
that's
very,
even better.
very excited. Thank you, Chief. Tweet at Jody Houser and congratulate her on her inevitable conquest of the universe.
Yeah, she's writing 6 books right now. 6 books.
Yeah, it's just...
That's Sleep, crazy. Jody. Sleep.
It's gotten to the point where I'm like going through my weekly pull, and I'm surprised to see her name now. It's no longer like, oh, I got to get a friend's book. It's like, oh, wow, that's yours. Okay.
Oh, that's awesome.
Panic by Jody. Today, issue 2 of the Star Wars Rogue One official adaptation comes out, written by Jody Houser.
Wow.
Painkiller. There's a whole. I have a whole bunch of them that just happened in my.
This is a longer diversion than I meant it to be. All I wanted to say was Jody got nominated for an Eisner. Please tweet at her with happiness.
You did,
but it kind of went places.
I did get to use my favorite veering away from the subject joke, which is whatever happened to Vera Lynn, which is my favorite thing to say when someone says, "Let me veer away from this," and you veer away from them with Vera Lynn, and there's just so much veering.
It's a virulent concept.
I have all of her albums. It's a thing.
Nice.
All I know is that Jody Houser is amazing, and I'm so glad that I finally got to meet her at the Geek and Sundry party over at WonderCon and all that. I was like, oh, I finally get to meet you. Like, you're the friend that I've been looking forward to.
She's fabulous, and
yeah.
we'll have her on the show at some point in the very near future.
Jody, come on our show.
All right. Yeah, Jody, you should come on our show.
But speaking of the Eisner Awards, I wanted to count it, but their website is useless. So it's going to take a lot of research for me to confirm exactly how many Eisner Awards and nominations have gone to Mr. Brian K. Vaughan.
Oh, there's countless.
Dozens?
There's
I think
dozens.
Literally dozens?
Let me see here. I've got the entire list. 2005 Eisner for Best New Series to Ex Machina. 2005 Eisner for Best Writer. Why the Last Man, Runaways, Ex Machina. All in 1 year.
I mean...
And they're all amazing books. 2008 Eisner for Best Continuing Series for Why the Last Man. 2008 Eisner for Best New Series, Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 8.
I forgot about that. Wow.
No future for you.
Oh my god.
2013 Eisner for Best Writer, Saga. 2000 Eisner Award for Best New Series, Saga. 2013 Eisner for Best Continuing, Saga with Fiona Staples. He also got a Hugo Award for Saga. Eisner for Best Writer, Saga 2014. 2014 he got 2013, 2014 basically belonged to him, and then 2015 he got Best Continuing for Saga. And then he got one in 2015 for Best Digital Webcomic for The Private Eye with Marcos Martin. Which is
And like I was going to say,
They finally talked him
several,
into doing
several
a
of my
paper.
favorite
We'll
books
talk
of
about
his
this.
aren't even on that list. This is kind of terrible.
Yeah.
It's nutty, and he's nominated again this year.
For what? For Saga? Probably.
I think Paper Girls is on.
Paper
Paper
Girls.
Girls,
He
which
was nominated last
for
year,
Best New
too.
Series. It was up
Yeah.
for Best New Series last year, and it's up for Best Ongoing this year.
I haven't actually finished looking at the long list of Eisner nominees.
There's so
Yeah, I haven't even looked
so
yet.
much good
I
stuff.
got through like 3 categories.
Are we going to talk about? Do we want to talk about that next week?
Maybe.
I'm into it.
I'm into it.
I can obviously talk about the Eisners for a while.
We may like it may just turn into a thing where we talk about the Eisners from between now and the Eisners. Like
Yeah.
that could very easily happen.
Probably gonna happen. There are other awards in comics, and of course, as with anything, there are problems with comic book awards. But one thing I love about them is that, like, any chance to celebrate great work being done in comics is a way that we can. It helps us to communicate to people, like, hey, this would be worth your time. And in a world where millions of people have not read Saga, we need that.
And I'm always so much more excited to talk about the nominees than I am to necessarily talk about the winners.
It's
Yeah.
fun to
Like
celebrate whoever wins.
Well, and
it's
like-
fun, but like now we've got this. We have a huge list.
What
and
was
it's
so
just
fun
great to play
about writing the Eisners, or writing for Barrowman for the Eisners last year was that I suddenly had an excuse to read so many books that I typically wouldn't have read. Like, what's the
Best reality-based work, secretly the best category at the Eisners. I don't know when that just became
Yeah.
my favorite books every year, but
like Giant Days? I never would have. That's not a book that typically would call to me. I'd be like, oh, that's fine. I'm glad that people are enjoying that book. That sounds great. But like, I had to read it last year. I was like, oh my god, this book is so good. Like, so.
this is the best case scenario.
So we were like let's talk a little. Brian K. Vaughan is the subject.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Let's talk a little bit about this guy.
Sorry, Mosi.
Who's Brian K. Vaughan?
Okay. So
Thank
let's
you,
talk
John.
about Brian K. Vaughan. Thanks for getting us back on the subject. With
But in the meantime, he's nominated for Best Continuing Series for Paper Girls with Cliff Chang, of course. Nominated for Best Continuing Series for Saga with Fiona Staples. And nominated once again for Best Writer for Paper Girls and Saga.
Unbelievable, this guy.
God, we're gonna talk about Paper Girls. I'm so excited.
Brian K. Vaughan is a comic book writer who started in the early 2000s. I can't remember exactly when.
Late 90s, I think.
Late 90s, yeah. Runaways came out in like 2003, I want to say, and that's his own invention through Marvel. Interestingly enough, he got his giant start with the Stan Hatton Project.
What is that?
The Stan Hatton Project, is it still going? Do you know?
I have no idea.
The Stan Hatton Project was something that started around 1995 and 1996, and they went to New York University to the creative writing department and said, hey, anyone here want to write comics? And everyone there was like, well, we want to write screenplays and TV. And they were like, that's great. Come write comics for us. We'll teach you how. And Brian K. Vaughan was one of those students who got to go learn from Marvel editors how to write comic books, specifically for Marvel, but comic books in general. So he went and did that. I don't remember what exactly he worked on outside of, I know he did the Runaways, and I've got a list here. Let me.
Well, like any
brought
writer, I know he
one-
did a little piecemeal stuff. But
Yeah. I
He
think
he did some X-Men in the middle 90s. He did Cable, Wolverine, X-Men Unlimited, Mystique, Ultimate
I brought
X-Men.
his
So he was
Mystique
kind
volume
of.
because it was the first thing I could
Did you
find
really?
that wasn't his indie work. I have not read this, but as with any his early assignments were
Hood?
working on other people's characters.
Age of Apocalypse, Tales of the Age of Apocalypse is the oldest thing I could find here.
Yeah, that's what I've got
Yeah, I
too.
think that's
Sinister
right. Short
Bloodlines
story,
from
96, which
96.
probably right when he was in school. So he was getting like stories here and there, and then
And you love the
miniseries.
Hood.
Well, weirdly, I went back and reread The Hood. It's not as good as I remember. It's definitely early work, but I will say that The Hood is one of those. The great thing about shared continuity is that you can have a really, really good idea that hasn't quite manifested properly, and eventually someone's going to notice the greatness you put in there and actually
Pick up on it.
pick up
Help
on it.
manifest it.
And The Hood didn't really become super, super interesting. It was a fun little concept book. But it's so outshined by his other work now. It's like one of it's and other writers came along and figured out what was great about that character, and like I got to give Bendis credit for figuring out that the Hood needed to come back and was not just a little
He developed him heavily as a bad guy in his new Avengers run.
the notion of the book Hood, and it's a 6-issue miniseries. Not my favorite read of Brian K. Vaughan's.
Who's
but
the
it
character and the story and everything?
He's basically a thug. He's a street hood. He's a terrible guy. He's a liar. He's a deep compartmentalizer. He's a guy who's Best qualities is that he's trying to steal enough money to like keep his best friend in AA and not drinking and get his mom into a better nursing home. But he's terrible. He's just terrible. I mean, like, not even in a fun way. He's lying to his pregnant wife. He's seeing hookers on the side. He's beating up people in alleys and stealing their shit. Like, he's just terrible. And he's one of those people who is just gets through life by telling everyone a different story until they catch him at it, and then he beats the shit out of them and takes their shit. Like, it's basically, he's a terrible guy. They go to rob a warehouse one night for some money, and they find like this weird occult setup, and they find a demon, he and his friend, and they shoot and kill the demon, and they take his shoes and his jacket off the corpse of this thing, because that's what he decides to do.
That's what you do when you shoot a demon.
And the shoes give
Loot
him
the
the
corpse.
power to
Yep.
fly.
I guess we all would.
Yeah,
The
we
shoes-
would all
the
loot the
shoes give him
corpse.
the power to fly, and the cloak give him the power to turn invisible as long as he holds his breath. And between the two of them, this is basically how we get low-level supervillains. The whole notion is this is a story of a Spider-Man villain becoming a thing, and like how that happens. And it's a sad, messed up story, but really there are no good people in this story. This is just bad people and worse people. But eventually, this character got picked up by Brian Michael Bendis's. This is a great idea for the notion of a character like Kingpin, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with Kingpin from Daredevil, of a guy who's a career criminal who's just slightly above average. And the notion of a career criminal who really gets the notion of, I can organize these idiots who want to be supervillains and actually create a power structure. And he's a great character for that, and he's unbelievably flawed that he knows that he's nothing without some sort of superpower, so he's constantly, desperately holding on to superpowers by any means necessary, and sacrifices, very Scarface style, sacrifices everything that he cares about to get just enough to save what he cares about, even though it's gone now. It's a big, terrible mess.
Well, was it Bendis who decided, like, who added the more, like, demonic powers to the Hood?
This is actually a Brian K. Vaughan thing that I wanted to talk about. Is I feel like one of my favorite things about Brian K. Vaughan, like if I wanted to make a broad generalization, is that it always feels like there's a bigger story behind everything he's doing. Whatever he's doing, he tells these very human stories. I get a lot from reading him. But there is a larger world of something darker and more sinister always at play. Like, I feel like way about Why the Last Man, about Saga, about
He
Swamp
can't
Thing.
do a story that isn't simultaneously intimate and world building.
Yeah.
Like he can't turn off either of those things.
No.
Yeah, yeah.
Which
So
is
that's
nice.
one of the reasons that I love
Ex
him so
Machina.
much. Yeah,
Yeah, and they all, and like this is one of those things where they never really go into where the powers come from, but they're not good. And later on is when he finally meets Doctor Strange, who's like, "Do you have any idea what this is? You found radium in a truck. You're
And
going
you
to
ate it.
die."
Good
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, it's amazing.
yeah. But it is interesting that you're saying like with a shared universe like that, Brian K. Vaughan's like, here's 6 issues of this character, and then everyone else is like, oh my god, yeah, let's run with
and
this.
like 3
players
years later,
yeah.
Bendis is like, "Why has no one done anything with
Yeah.
this?" Boom.
And it's interesting that you're bringing up Bendis because I feel like Bendis and Brian K. Vaughan have a lot in common in terms of like their actual writing style. They don't really have a lot of like inset panels like, and then this person went and did this or that. It's almost all completely dialogue driven.
And it's good dialogue.
It's great dialogue. It's great character development. Like we were saying in the pre-show, or like I was saying in the pre-show at least. It's very like I feel like he's like J.K. Rowling in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
like, where it's like it's very simple, it's easy, it's accessible, it's easily digestible language. Whereas like someone like Jonathan Hickman, you're just like, all right, let me read that panel 7 more times to fully
It's like
comprehend what they've
it's like the
just
second
said.
Matrix film. You're just
Yeah.
sitting there going, "Oh."
Yeah. But with Brian K. Vaughan and with Bendis, it's simple. It's relatively
Bendis
simple language.
uses more to say the same amount. He talks a lot, whereas
He's very
Vaughn is very succinct. But
Yeah, Vaughan is very succinct. He can get a lot of character development, which is like 2 or 3 words. Like he's very good with the
that
dialogue,
first issue
so.
of Saga is there's so much happening.
Yeah.
So that was my quick review of the Hood. Rereading it is like
Excellent.
it is definitely not like it's not something I would necessarily recommend for people unless they've already come across the character and are kind of interested in their origins. But it's a fascinating addition to the Marvel universe. It's
Sure.
a character I love deeply in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, he's a good character.
I will say, like, in terms of simplicity, it definitely, like, his books are very accessible. Like, a lot of his books are gateway comics. A lot of folks who haven't read comics before find it easy to transition into them. The stories are very, like, the emotional storytelling is usually very sophisticated, but he's not generally doing, like, a ton of formal experimentation. So it's usually not like a crazy turn it upside down to read it layout kind of experiment. He's using, like, the tools that he's interested in playing with are others that are very easily translatable, like from film and novels and other things. Like, those are sort of the like, not that he doesn't work with tremendously creative artists, but, like, I think those are, he chooses to experiment with other narrative elements.
Sure.
That are kind of easier to pick up on for non-comics readers, I guess.
Yeah, and, like, I mean, my first big introduction to him was The Oath, which I think is 2005, 2006, around the same time that he's writing The Runaways, I think. And The Oath is my go-to book for people who are like, where should I start with Doctor Strange? I'm like, read The Oath. It's 5 issues.
2006, 1 through 5.
It's only 5 issues. It's super easy to understand. It's incredibly accessible. Like, if you want to get deep into Doctor Strange, that gets weird and heady and difficult to read and understand. And what? But Brian K. Vaughan is like, he got shot with Hitler's gun. It's one of the only guns in the world that could shoot Doctor Strange. Now he's got to go figure out how to do that, how to fix himself. And it starts there. Like, it's super easy. So that's one of the reasons that I love Brian K. Vaughan so much.
So essentially, like, the chronology, thank you, Comic Book Database, which I always forget, has comicbookdb.com. You can actually hit, like, show me a chronological listing of this creator's credits, which I love.
That's awesome.
So you kind of get, like, a couple years of just working for Marvel, and then he starts branching out to DC and Vertigo.
And that's where things get interesting.
And ultimately, he will start doing both his own stuff and, like, he'll have a period of 5 or 6 years where he's working both on his own stuff and the big companies. And now, these days, Brian K. Vaughan is working almost exclusively on his own creator-owned material. So there's sort of phases of his career, like learning his trade at Marvel and then at Marvel and DC, starting to do his own stuff in addition to that, doing them both for several years with some really fantastic work in it, and then, like, the current generation Brian K. Vaughan, which is fully his own stuff. And we haven't mentioned his TV career.
No, not yet. And I feel that that's actually that chronology was fairly typical of the time of, like, if, like, you get in, you start writing, you've got 5 really great Spider-Man stories you want to tell, and then you've told them.
Yeah.
And you're like, now what?
Now what? But in the meantime, you've learned the trade. You've hung out with these editors who have shown you so much more. You've got a name. And, like, one of the things that what you're saying that's so interesting is he was able to start working on his own stuff while also keeping it within the Marvel family. Like, one of his very first things that was was The Runaways.
The Runaways.
Like,
one of my favorite books of all time. Get those hardcovers out.
Oh yeah, let's bring it. Let's bring out The Runaways.
So he's been at Marvel about 7 years, I think, when this comes out.
Wow, that's a cover.
Yeah, this is so good.
That's why I brought
keep talking.
the first 2 hardcovers of this was, like, he has talked about it sort of like his baby to the Marvel universe. Characters that he wouldn't own, but that could go on living forever in, like, some of them living forever. In the wider Marvel mythology, like, that he sort of gifted us with this, like, I kind of jumped in because I got excited.
No, take it.
You're rolling. You're rolling.
Run.
It's circa 2003. Did you?
I think it's 2003, 2004. I've got it here.
And a brand new
2006.
both of
Runaways
the
Volume 1, 2006.
Well, when did the issues start coming out though?
Oh, 2003.
Okay.
Oh, they didn't kill. Oh, interesting. All right.
Well, and there's probably a million different printings of the
First hardcover 2006. Was first collected, but volumes 1 through 6 were published.
There might have been a trade in the middle or something like that. So circa 2003, most of the big companies will periodically have, like, new set of teenagers books. They almost always hook me. Most, like, a disturbing proportion of my favorite comics are new set of teens discover their powers and, like, figure out who they are. Like, that's a formula that works on me real well.
It always works.
It's an easy hook for me too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason I'm excited for Runaways, Cloak and Dagger, New Warriors, like, all that stuff that's going to be on TV. I'm just like,
give me another Teen Titans book. I'm in.
There's a new Generation X launching.
Done.
Okay, so I was just going to be like, we love teenagers, but that sounds wrong. We love stories
about teenagers are great. I'm a big fan of stories
not in a
about
weird way.
teenagers.
So,
not in a weird way.
We're all grown-ups. Read Runaways. This is a book about a bunch of characters he made up with artist Adrian Alfona on his original run that would go on to be written and drawn by a number of different wonderful people, including Joss Whedon and Catherine Newman, who did one of my favorite runs. But they were invented by Brian Vaughan and Adrian Alfona. And they...
I think we can give the hook. It's okay. I think it's okay.
Like,
it's
so
okay
I
to
have
give the
this
hook.
conflict with it where it's like...
Because you don't want to spoil anything.
You can't explain the book without spoiling the beginning, but...
It's the first issue.
It's the
though.
first issue.
Yeah.
I feel like...
If you're already into it, stop listening now, and I'll wave my arms when we're done. Runaways is about a bunch of teenagers whose parents are all friends who discover that their parents have a secret. Their parents are essentially supervillains. The kids figure this out, and they all go on the run together, and that is why they are the Runaways. These sort of 6 kids, the only thing they have in common is that their parents all hang out. And it's wonderful, like, for longtime Marvel buffs, it's really fun because it plugs this hole on the West Coast.
Yeah.
That,
Because
like,
it all takes place in LA.
yeah, it's an LA-based story, and for years there'd been some things that happened out in like San Francisco or Los Angeles, but the massive bulk of Marvel storytelling had been in New York. And so they actually, like, there's an in-story reason in this book that, like, LA has been kept relatively quiet. But essentially, it all goes wrong from there, and the kids discover that they've sort of inherited different elements and abilities from various sources. So it's just, like, a bunch of kids on the run. I love them. I love them so
They're
much.
great, and they're a great group. They're a great team, and
Like,
and their
great
adventures
characters.
post these books have been really interesting. Like, people have really respected.
I'm going to wave my arms because we're done with spoilers.
Spoilers
Or
are-
at least the basic plot spoiler there.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I love about the book, because I reread it and prep for this show, was how he played with all those, like just the psychology of being a teenager and, like...
Oh, God, they're so...
Like, just, like all the... Like, I can remember, like, when I was younger, and if you're younger now, you're currently going through this. Which camera am I looking at?
Key, you don't understand. Okay, no.
But it's that whole thing of,
understand
like,
the key.
my parents don't understand me. My parents are out to get me. All my parents just want me to die. Like, if they really love me, you know, it's all that stuff, but actually realized.
No, it's the Joss Whedon narrative metaphor pushed
Monsters
to
as
extreme.
metaphor,
yeah.
Monsters as metaphor. If, like, no, really, your parents are evil.
Yeah,
Your
no,
parents
for
are
real.
legitimately evil.
Your parents are legitimately trying to take over the world.
Yeah, now what you gonna do?
So he plays with that, like, sort of like common, like, teenager, like, what is that, a trope or like?
I mean, like, I hate the word trope, but
yeah,
it
so
is.
do I. But like, I don't feel like that fits. But
Experience.
Experience. Yeah, like that common
What is a teen
emotional experience that I didn't have that because I know that my mom and dad might be watching, and I thought you were lovely parents the entire time.
My parents know exactly what I thought of them. Bless them. Putting up with my ass.
So yeah, that's one of my favorite things about that book is how blatant that is, but how wonderful it is, and how it comes out of nowhere. Like, oh my god, yeah, that is how I felt sometimes. Yeah, so
And they're not necessarily good to each other, and they're not good for each other.
They make teenage mistakes.
and they make a lot of mistakes.
But they're written written so naturally as teens. It's one of the reasons I'm really interested in the forthcoming TV adaptation of this book. Is that, like, when I've revisited the book, they are written beautifully as, like, circa 2003 teenagers. Like, MMOs are new, and we immediately meet one of the characters playing one of them, which is adorable. They, like, their fashion, and this is an Adrian Alfona thing, he knows how to dress teenagers in this
it's
way that
great.
establishes character in, like, this, it communicates perfectly and clearly. And a lot of this will translate directly, but, like, I'm really curious to see how the TV show handles the fact that these should be 2017 teens. So, you know, like, the Runaways didn't have Instagrams, but they would have.
They would
and
have.
they probably will now.
yeah, or Snapchat or
It's
the
these are
Snapchat
things,
and the Twitters.
rather than dating the book, to me, they make it feel authentic. Because
Yeah.
these read like real teens. But that's the thing I'm curious about in adaptation.
It's not forced, it's not pressed, but it's
Yeah.
definitely there.
But it is still kind of dated. Like, it is authentic, but, like, I remember reading it
It has a time
a
and
couple
place.
days ago and being like, oh, that's an early 2000s reference.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's from the early 2000s.
And these
okay.
kids, I give them credit in the Marvel universe. These kids are now a little older, which I really like
Yeah.
in the Marvel U that
Yeah.
they've let these kids have a little bit of maturity.
Well, and they also, in the course of the book, they start introducing them to other sort of, like, two characters like Cloak and Dagger, who
Yeah.
have a couple years' experience on them and sort of talk to them about, like, their experience in them. And
Can-
that they take advantage of the shared Marvel Universe possibilities there.
Is it spoiler to say who the characters are?
Um,
Like, can we say like
No, I
Nika
think-
Minoru does this and Alex Wilder does this and
if
Chase
there's
Stein?
I think if we needed to make a point, I think there's no reason not to do it.
Because I don't want to spoil anything,
No.
but like the books are 2003.
But I'll also say we also just discussed Cloak, and that's part of the thing we do on the show is Cloak and Dagger. Cloak and
Oh,
Dagger. are
Cloak
really
and Dagger.
interesting.
Right, yes.
And we can do this. Is Cloak and Dagger were the 80s? Was it the 80s?
early
Cloak and Dagger
80s, created I believe by Bill Mantlo, who also created Rocket Raccoon.
under. I think that might be true. Oh God. They were made as an anti-drug campaign. Oh, this is so embarrassing.
Teens in New York who
Teens.
get it experimented on by folks, but like
By
it's
Trying to make
Silvermane.
drug. Yeah,
It was
they're
Silvermane trying to make a
drug.
synthetic heroin. And what? And do you really need a synthetic heroin? Like,
Do you also
it's
need to
I
kidnap
guess.
maybe it's better.
teenagers
I don't know.
to experiment the synthetic heroin?
You can't
on?
find any volunteers.
Yeah, I feel like volunteers would
But
be available.
so with Cloak and Dagger though, like they were experimenting on all these other teenagers. Every other teenager that they experimented on died, except for Tandy and Tyrone,
Very dark.
who got powers from the synthetic heroin.
And like weirdly dumb yet cool powers.
This all happened in
Yeah.
the pages of Spider-Man,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you do.
As like a and
And then they spun off in their own series.
Spectacular Spider-Man, one of those books.
yeah, as
Yeah, it sounds
as
about right.
anti-drug superheroes. That was their whole thing. Is they're like vehemently anti-drug.
But what's interesting is that they were sort of like they ended up like living as displaced kids on the streets
Yeah.
of New York, and that is sort of why so this. In the meta narrative, that happened 25 years before the Runaways came along. So it was really perfect when the Runaways eventually run into the slightly, like the older Cloak and Dagger, not old, but like grown up now, where they're sort of like, we've
Got
been
their
there.
shit together. Yeah.
We've been
Don't do
there.
it.
Yeah,
Like-
we can help you.
and the kids react how the kids are going to react to that, which
One
I
of my
love.
Teens
favorite
love
things-
being told what to do.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about Cloak and Dagger is their symbiotic relationship. So like just to finish up on Cloak and Dagger,
who are also getting their own show.
I know, and it
know.
looks so good. Like
I
that
know,
last shot of the
I know,
trailer with
I
like
know.
Cloak on the roof. Oh, I loved it.
I can see all $8 on screen. I hope it's going to be good.
All 8 of those dollars.
It looks like $30, but man, I can tell. Like
Okay.
they took their 8 and made it look like 30, and I'm
That
so
was a
impressed.
show
It's
that-
weird because that's going to a network called Freeform, whereas the Runaways are going to Hulu,
Yeah.
and neither of them are technically
Probably
connected to
gonna
Netflix, so who knows how that's
connect,
going to work.
yeah.
I could hope that they're going to cross over at some point.
We
but
can
that's
all
just,
hope.
that's
That would be
my-
amazing.
That's my.
So Cloak and Dagger have a symbiotic relationship where Cloak has like, so he wears this cloak and he has a connection to the Dark Force dimension, and he can very easily succumb to like the sort of evils that come out of that dimension unless he is like fed light,
Yes,
like
he has to eat,
absorbs
yeah.
light, like and Dagger on the other hand, Tandy has to expel light or she'll basically explode, like she'll overheat. So she has a place to safely put
keeps
her
him
light
sane, yeah, they've
that
got a
keeps him
weird-
sane from turning evil.
And they have to work out whether or not it's just a really unhealthy relationship
Mm-hmm.
or not, and it's kind of fun.
It's a difficult, like it can be a delicate relationship to
Sure.
write, especially because like she's blonde and white and has light powers, and he is a dark-skinned black man with darkness powers. So it's a little on the nose.
It's a little on the. it's a
But
little
like
on the nose.
people have written them in really fun and ways that like give them different flavors of like whether they're just best friends or whether there's a romantic side to it or like and
it's like an
somebody even
unrequited
switched
love.
their powers up for a while.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think. That happened, and so it's just one of those like write with caution.
Doctor
and-
Strange fake killed Dagger at one point.
Well,
or,
and like
I think.
he got like something weird happened to him when he got his powers. Like his like skin texture changed and his voice changed like really heavily and like
he basically just matured.
Well, no, I mean, like, well, yeah, thank you. They remark on it that he has like wood, like almost there's like wooden skin at one point, like that. It's
Yeah.
actually
I'm not
got
sure
like
they're
a.
consistent about that one.
They're a little, but they mention it in the book. Is that his? It's like the texture of his skin changed, and also that his like even the way he speaks. When he's like completely depowered, the way he speaks actually changes. Like there's like something behind him occasionally that's trying to get out. It's a weird, fascinating book.
Yeah.
It is. It
They've
shouldn't
actually
exist,
only
but
rarely
it's so
had their
fascinating.
own solo series, so a lot of their
Yeah.
stuff has been when they show up in other people's books, which is part of the fun of a
Yeah.
shared universe. Is that your whole history can come from like times that you met other people, and just a couple of times that you've had your own book.
And
But-
he's a bit of a superhero nerd. I love like Cloak was one of my favorite. He was so
I love
the
Cloak.
power was
I
so
love
cool
Cloak,
and he
yeah.
was so cool about it. And, it
And
was
his
like,
cloak is kind of It's all very much like the Cloak and the Doctor Strange movie, where it kind of has a mind of its own.
Every kid who enjoyed The Crow really was like, I just want Cloak and Dagger to show up in The Crow now, man.
All right, so Brian K. Vaughan.
Yes.
Yeah, Brian K. Vaughan.
Is this a two-parter? Because there's a lot of Vaughan.
We're doing good.
So Runaways is great. We love Runaways.
Highly recommend it.
Do we want to move on to Why the Last Man?
Well,
Do we have questions?
I've got a couple things right here. What do you think is a good starting point for Cloak and Dagger? I mean, honestly,
Oh, jeez.
Cloak and Dagger had if
I
you're
turned
okay
into Mr.
with,
Garrison there for a second. Oh, jeez.
oh, jeez.
They have finally put a couple of their books back into print, but I haven't had a chance to sort of sit down and like decide.
Though, if you're okay with how 80s tastic it is and just how Don't Do Drugs it is, like how very Nancy Reagan the book is,
Yeah.
and it's very Nancy Reagan. The original miniseries is actually, it's beautiful,
Yeah.
I think, and quite good.
And back in print now.
And back
There's
in
a
print.
new collection.
And you'll run into them if you read The Runaways, which is
Yeah.
another great place to run into
I
them.
think
just
that is a
knowing-
fantastic place to meet them as well.
Yeah.
But
Also,
you have to get like
they,
a few books into Runaways before that happens.
and I don't know if it's in print, but they had their own. So, like in the early '90s, I want to say late '80s, early '90s, they brought back Strange Tales. I think for a volume
For
2.
briefly, yeah.
And like Doctor Strange had 10 pages, and Cloak and Dagger had 10 pages. But I don't know if it's in print. But that was a fun read too. So
Another thing we got before we move on is, we've got a lot of questions. We're going to get to as many of these as we can.
hi everybody.
Hi guys, we know this is not just us on this. Would you say that there's some sort of Brian K. Vaughan style or a story that defines his style? And I've been thinking about this because I've been staring at this question from Japan Rose for a while.
Hi Japan Rose.
And I think it's less of a style and more of like there's a modern television feel to him.
Yeah, very much.
Like I don't think it's less the style because he kind of writes everything.
What's interesting, like I like that question because like I was really struggling with that for the last couple days and like looking up interviews with him, trying to really nail down like what's his actual style. And the only thing I can come up with is he's very simple in like terms of like the story beats are relatively simple, the language is accessible, but the stories, like we said earlier, are incredibly complex and like you're just waiting for that one thing to break. And one of the things that I love about what he does is he has a very comical style, very conversational dialogue, very easily accessible characters. You immediately understand them within a panel or two who they are, but then he can like put such amazing twists on them and on the stories. Like one of my favorite things in Saga is, you know, you hear a little bit about Marco's ex-fiance, but then she enters into the fray and she's way bigger than he ever led you to believe. It's like, oh, so that's the ex-fiance. Oh my God, she what? Like, and I think he does that really well in all of his stories. Like even in Ex Machina, he does something where he's like, here's like, there were a trio of these three guys who all fought crime together, but then after he becomes mayor of New York City, the relationship gets weird and muddied, and I think he does that very well throughout all of his stories.
Interpersonal relationships maybe are kind of like.
But it's weird because a lot of the things that are like, what's his style? And we're like being good at things.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, like it's a difficult way to answer that. Like, I guess one way is to work backwards from I have met folks, and it's totally okay if you're one of the, like, I've met folks who are not super into his work. So one thing that I've tried to do is sort of be like, okay, what is it that you're seeing that's different from what I see, which is that I adore everything. So I've had friends that I gave some of his books to where they found them, like, too quippy.
Okay.
And it doesn't apply to all of his work. Like,
a little
that's
bit
the
like Joss
problem.
Whedon's like Age of Ultron, where you're just like, all right, slow down on the quips.
No, and it's not a criticism that I share, because for me, like, those, like, all of those remarks are illustrating character and contributing to the world in a way that I find very satisfying. But it would lean into what you said. Some folks get the same modern TV vibe from some of his writing, but it's a turn off for them.
Yeah.
And like it's not the case with me. And I think like he's got so much range now, and he's doing so many different things that I'm not sure the modern TV thing or even the simplicity apply to works like Private Eye.
Yeah.
Where he's doing this sort of experimental, self-contained, like
Private Baghdad or
yeah.
Oh God.
So there might
ruin everything.
that like leaning on dialogue over other sort of forms of story might appeal. Like I guess it would count as a trademark in terms of like if it's something that people call out.
You know
I
what
don't
else
We're
I
trying
was-
to answer the question.
He
it's hard.
doesn't define himself very well. It's one of the things I actually really like about his work is that there's not a lot of people. I haven't met a lot of people who very specifically are not into his thing.
Yeah,
And there are
very
always
few.
people who are not into somebody's thing.
Of course.
There's nobody that is liked. Nothing is liked by everybody. But like it's easier to find somebody who doesn't like something if something is consistent. And even what makes him fun isn't consistent.
Yeah.
So that kind of is fun. Is when you mentioned doing a Brian K. Vaughan episode, I'm like, I had a moment where I'm like, I don't necessarily know everything he's read, but I went back and looked, and like, I know all this. It just didn't occur to me that he had written
all of it because
Well,
it's
and-
also disparate and different
All
and
over
all
the
over the
Can we
place.
can we talk about why? Because I believe this was sort
Yeah,
of
let's
the
do it,
inflection
because
point
we
where
like
Brian
you.
K. Vaughan went from like working solidly on and doing some interesting stuff at Marvel and DC. You'll get to his DC stuff later, I think, his Vertigo anyway.
Yeah, and
his existing.
And as
property
someone said,
Vertigo.
like, what do you think is his bigger departure from his usual style? Is like he doesn't have a usual style. Everything's kind of a departure.
You know what I love?
He's not grounded in that way.
One of the things that I love about him is because like whenever I approach something and I want to write, like I'm like I want to be a writer, and I sit down and start trying to write a story. I'll come to places where I'm like, I can't write that. Like that's gonna offend someone or hurt someone's feelings, or even though the character would do that, I as a writer can't do that. Brian K. Vaughan's like, I'll write the N-word on a picture of Lincoln. Done.
God, that book.
that-
That book.
Ex
That's a
Machina.
whole.
wow.
Ex Machina. He wrote.
I haven't read Ex Machina.
Ex Machina.
I know.
yeah.
I was just. I know. I was having fun.
No, Ex Machina. There's
So
a
do
big
you
plot
wanna-
point where like there's a like at the
Okay. Well,
Metropolitan.
here's the deal. Let's actually set this up for people.
Okay, well,
Ex-
forget about
I
why
was
we're
gonna say-
skipping to the next
Sorry.
one.
I didn't mean to.
No,
it's here.
From that, like,
I'm actually super curious what that's
So
about.
Ex Machina is the story of basically a superhero becomes mayor of New York.
yeah,
And he quits being a superhero and becomes mayor of New York and is now mayor of New York. And he became mayor of New York because, and this is it's such a fascinating book because
beginning.
he has the ability to talk to machines and machines will listen to him. And it's a very weird, interesting
it's very much
power.
like the opposite of Preacher in a way, where
It's
he's like where Preacher
very
can,
opposite of Preacher on so many levels.
Yeah,
And he managed, because of his superpowers, to save one of the Twin Towers.
yeah. This takes place immediately after 2011.
Yeah, and
Or,
because
2000
he saved
2001.
because he saved one of the two towers, he basically gets elected mayor. They figure out that he can run as an independent and becomes mayor because he's insanely popular. And it's mostly a political book. Like 80% of the
Yeah.
book is just all about city politics, and city politics are fascinating.
It like
Brian Vaughan lived in New York for many years.
And really understands how a lot of this works, and it's very much like a fun, like it's got a little bit of superhero West Wing,
yeah.
with a little bit of a creepy occult vibe happening, because every now and then we're reminded that we don't quite understand where his powers come from or how they work, and the more you get to know them, the more you realize that it's really disturbing to be able to have a conversation with a machine.
Yeah.
That is deeply disturbing. And one of the things that happens is they go under fire because of public of a gallery paying for public art, and somebody does this very one of the artist with a government fund creates this very controversial piece of art, and is basically the whole series of issues are you going to pull this piece of art out of the museum or not?
See, this makes way more sense. Okay,
Yeah.
because Brian
So-
Vaughan is not a shock value
No,
writer.
he's not.
He's
He's
willing
not.
to
He's really not.
frighten you and break your heart. But you surprised me. But this makes that the context would turn out to
yeah.
be because I want to have a serious conversation about artistic ethics. That makes sense to me.
And
Yeah.
it is, and having that whole conversation with the artist is, did you really mean to say anything here, or are you just trying to be an asshole?
Yeah.
And that conversation comes up, and it's really a fascinating dissection of that conversation.
And the point that I was pointing at, like that I was trying to
It's
say
not
was,
everybody could write that book.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
I would come up with that and be like, well, the character would do that, but I can't put that in a book. Brian K. Vaughan's like, character would do that, and it's going in a book, and I'm going to have a conversation
That
about
issue
it. Like,
also has the most West Wing ending of any comic book, of like he comes in like, and I'm the goddamn president, and it's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting about Vox Machina, is that I love that I can never say that word. I've
It's
tried
comics.
my entire
we
life.
just say things
Jeff,
that we read.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about that was that, like, when I read the first issue, I was like, oh my god, politics is so boring. But by the end of the second book, I was like, oh, I need to get to the bottom of what's actually going on here. Like, and it pulled, like, by the second issue, I was completely absorbed by it. So I haven't finished the series.
Oh,
Fantastic.
did you get as far as his arch nemesis?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
and the subway, the thing in the subway. There's
Uh-huh.
a lot to like.
There's a lot.
The
but-
ending is a little soft, but it's a really, if you're interested.
But I will warn you, like, it is very political.
It
It's
is
very
very
West Wing, and a lot of the panels are talking. Grr. There's not a lot of heroics. It's like every 6 or 7 pages, you'll get a flashback to him being a hero, but nothing flash forward, basically.
No,
so.
but like he's actually under a legal law that he can't like use his power. Like he's actually like required by law not to. He has to go through a whole thing anytime he does any kind of power is used. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so this dates back to Breakout Brian Vaughan, which is
Yes.
when he'd been working in the like regular Marvel and DC
Thank you for
like
getting
and
us
Vertigo
back on
worlds for a
track.
couple years, and he was starting to do like, well, what if I have like we've talked about this before, but sort of like companies like imprints like Vertigo had started to establish this space for like your own long form idea, like Sandman or Preacher in the mid to late 90s, that could like give you a home for a story that you want to tell that's not with existing things, but still like under the umbrella of one of these companies. So his first couple were like that. I think Ex Machina was probably slightly later, but it was with Wildstorm, an imprint of DC. They used to be Image, DC bought them. It's a whole thing.
Sorry.
And that
but
was
he's-
2004 to 2010.
Yeah, and but like 2002 was sort of this inflection point. He had this book that started coming out under Vertigo, which like it's so interesting to say this now because 10 years ago I would have been like, obviously Vertigo, all good long form books come out of Vertigo, the end. And it's
ya.
now we've had the second and maybe ultimately more meaningful Image revolution. We'll see. And so his new hits are all Image books, but that's curious publisher how the sausage made stuff. Why the Last Man is a book that ran for 60 issues, about 5 years. It was collected initially in 10 little volumes. Now they do it as 5 bigger chunks. So watch out for which versions you're getting so that your numbers all match up. It is. Can I do that?
Take it.
I love this book.
No, it's
No.
This
is one of my.
I read it when it first came out, and I haven't touched it.
I
in,
just reread
like,
the first
5
couple
years.
issues there's so much to like.
Yeah.
There's so much to like in this book.
I
This is
picked
one
it
of-
up because it was called Why the Last Man, and the cover had a monkey.
Yeah, it's fair enough.
Yeah.
It's this book. It's called Why, as in the letter, The Last Man. It is the story of a global catastrophe that hits, and at the same moment, every male mammal in the world drops dead, except for our main character and his monkey.
Who's
And
also a male, the monkey, right?
Yes.
The monkey is also
ampersand.
ampersand, and the main character's name is
Yorick.
because
As in, his dad was a
Dad's a
Shakespeare
Shakespeare nerd.
professor, and his sister's name is Hero, and she becomes amazing.
she's fascinating.
So the idea here is that like it's post-apocalyptic in the sense that, and this is 2002. So if any given 3 billion people dropped dead, the world would be dealing with a whole lot of chaos. But in addition to the chaos of any set of like the freeways are jammed, planes are falling out of the sky, all of this stuff. And people are obviously a little bit concerned about the long-term fate of the species, and they'd like to know what exactly happened. You also get, and this, for some people this is a turn on, and for some people this is a turn off, but I'm just going to go with it. I find this book wildly feminist. Because it essentially shows off, there's a, like, Israel rolls over the rest of the Middle East because they're the only people with a military. And it's an interesting, there are things that have aged better and worse about the feminism of the book in the time since. There's there's a bad guy early on where
I love the town with a secret that I'm not gonna the small town with a secret. I don't know if you know that one's nuts.
It's
Not
wonderful. My disclaimer about the feminism is that not every line or choice in the book is the same thing I would have done. But the other thing that's so feminist to me about this book is that by killing off nearly every dude in the world, but telling 60 issues of beautiful, sophisticated storytelling, he ends up developing one of the best rosters of female characters in any book I've ever read, because there's literally no one else.
There's no other possible male to have.
It's like, I say that as a joke, like he had to have a bunch of interesting female characters because there was no other choice, but it also, like, it means so much to me what they accomplished with this book. Ultimately, over the course of it, the other characters that he runs into, like 355 and Dr. Man and Hero, and like the other people who inhabit this world and the dilemmas they're facing and the choices they make are some of my favorite creations in comics. So I love this book. It was like
Oh God.
a go-to like gateway comic. It's terribly accessible for everyone because it doesn't take. I guess what you are right. Like it's simple. Like everybody dropped dead. What do you do?
Yeah,
but
like
that's
an
a
easy
deep
entry point.
It's such a deep rabbit hole. Like everything that goes right, everything that goes wrong, like and then you, like things like that hadn't even occurred to me, which is that there are no more mammals reproducing. So all the animal like species based on lifespans are just going extinct.
Yep.
And there's not going to be any more food.
Yeah, like there's it's a very existential
intense.
like the world is dying now. Like without like one entire gender there, the world starts to fall apart. How do
But
you
what's
handle
interesting is that, you know, we immediately, like, hope in different forms shows up pretty quickly because we almost immediately run into, like, one of the world's foremost on genetic biology doctors is Dr. Man, who we meet pretty quickly. So this and it becomes this,
Very
it's a
quickly.
road story where, like, it starts with Yorick is trying to find his
Who
girlfriend
is
was studying abroad in
not that
Australia.
bright. Yorick is not that
He's
bright.
not.
He's a very flawed hero, and like it's one of those what they ultimately do with that, and the things that turn out to have been intentional choices that you don't realize were. I love that character so much.
Yorick.
So his girlfriend was studying abroad in Australia,
You
and
could have
he's
said,
like,
"Alas, poor York." and
Alas,
you
poor
didn't.
Yorick. I know. I know.
You said, "Oh, York," and I was like, "No, alas, alas."
there's tons of interesting stuff. Like again, the world building in that book, because of the people we meet along the way, is just extraordinary. He wrote it and created it with Pia Guerra, a fabulous artist who was with him for almost the entire run. There are a few issues here and there where somebody else filled in, and most of them are excellent as well. But Brian Vaughan and Pia Guerra wrote Why the Last Man, and it was one of those, like, it has a beginning and a middle and an end, and then it's done. You can read the entire story now. And it gave him, he has talked, I think, in interviews that, like, he had sort of a daily writing ritual, and at one point he kind of did the math, and, like, that cliche that's partially based on research about putting 10,000 hours into something before you get good at it, like,
Yeah, before
or
you're a
truly
genius
good.
at it, yeah.
He, at some point he was like, I sat down and did the math on my, like, mandatory 2 pages a day or whatever, and essentially, like, the month I started Why the Last Man, I hit my 10,000 pages.
Wow.
Which I just
that's
found it interesting,
nuts.
like, because he,
Whoa.
that's the way he puts it. It's like, I tried to put in so much time getting good at what I
Yeah.
did. And not that he's claiming his work is a genius work.
No,
but he's like,
but-
here's an interesting thing. I got to an idea that really meant something to me that I was wildly excited about that I wouldn't have been able to write at an earlier stage in my career.
Yeah.
And it was at this time.
I read a fun interview with him, I think on The Verge, where he said, they asked him why, like, how did you determine to do like a longer term story versus some of your shorter stories? And his answer was very like, just practical. He was like, well, I figured if I came up with a story that would last 5 years, I would have a job for 5 years. So he's like, so
Brian
like,
is like half
comic book
joking in all
writer.
his interviews, and it's always hard to tell, like, okay, but really? But like,
but for real?
Really?
but like, but really?
But yeah, like the thing that
Really?
he said, it was fascinating because they were interviewing him about Saga. This is like around 2014, 2015, so it's a relatively recent interview where he was basically saying, then I was still hungry, like I was still just trying to make ends meet. I was recently married. I had to make sure that I had income coming in, and I'm just a sad, broke, poor little writer. So, you know, I came up with the story where it would last 5 years. I would get constant. I knew that I would have a job security for 5 years. And then once I got that done, I also had Ex Machina. That got finished, but by that
Never get
time,
tired of that.
my career was up and going. So now I can afford to do things like Saga, where it's just like wacky and out there.
And so one thing that why that book excelled at was that you got, like, because you were in this sort of crazy emergency, like a lot of life-threatening scenarios, but you would sort of stop and get people's backstories. And the other thing is, like, he was incredibly good at the cliffhanger.
Oh, yeah.
Still is. That's a I guess a trademark. Brian K. Vaughan can cliffhang like nobody.
He did.
He can.
He helped write a season of Lost.
So this is what I was getting
Yeah.
to. Is he was so good at, like, specifically, like, you know who's really good at character flashbacks and cliffhangers? And Damon Lindelof, who's a comic book nerd, was like, we need a guy
need
like
this
that
guy- we need
on
this
our
guy
show.
on Lost.
Go get that guy.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah, see, like he wrote an episode for season 2 that was actually one of the best episodes
I
of
haven't
season
seen
2.
Lost, I just forgot about it.
Yeah, I'm the same.
There's-
I'm the same.
You can keep living your life. There's a lot to like about it, but you can keep living your life. It's great. Comic books are so much easier to ingest, in my opinion, than long form television.
He
And
came
then
on for a
season
couple
3.
seasons, right?
Yeah, his big chunk was season 3. He did a
Okay.
little bit of season 2. He did a lot of season 3, and then worked a little bit on season 4. But like, and you can tell his flavor, which is interesting. There's a tight structure, and there is a quippiness that is inevitable in his work in there, and you can feel a lot of Why the Last Man in there too, which is interesting. Although I will say this is a far more not Runaways. Why not? This is a far more interesting piece of speculative science fiction than Lost managed to be, and it's a story that's, for however flawed it is, and it absolutely is really mind altering. Like, you can genuinely, no matter how post positive or negative feminist that you are, and I come from a long and glorious line of intense feminists. There was a lot to learn in there, and there's lots of points of view that are really fascinating. No matter how, even if you want to argue them, they're really interesting. And
There's an evil feminist in it who's kind of a straw man, but I still was fascinated by that, like somebody might take a position this dumb and extreme, like.
I've lived too long not to think they wouldn't.
And one of the this is like kind of, I don't know, like embarrassing or hyper vulnerable to admit, but like I didn't realize how much of a feminist I was not until I read Why the Last Man. And I went into
Just in
Why the
terms of
Last
things
Man.
that hadn't occurred to you yet necessarily.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Where like I wasn't like, women belong at the bottom of the line. Like I wasn't like that, but like reading the book, I was
We
like,
need to get a top hat and monocle when we do that.
yeah,
Sorry, carry on.
but like reading the book, it's like there's so many like male fantasies that could come out of I'm the last man on earth, ladies.
And
But,
Oh,
like,
none
and,
of
this is
them
and it's just
happen.
like, oh no, because women are people, and
yeah,
like
exactly.
some shit would
and
go
like,
down.
like I went into the book thinking like, oh, there'll probably be some of that in there. Like, all right, whatever.
And you have, and you kind of have this character whose only usefulness at this point is his like he is just vaguely less useful than the monkey by like for the first 3 books of like, you're an English major. What, you're worth nothing anymore.
Yeah,
Oh,
tell me about
oh God, I say
As
this
an
to you
English
as an English
major,
major.
yeah.
I'm like, you are the last person
Yeah,
we
if
need in the
you could
apocalypse.
just read this for like English major in the apocalypse. Like you could read it just for that. Like
Yeah, but like there was a lot of stuff in there that challenged me, like what you're saying with like the hyper uber feminist and like his road trip and all of that. I was like, oh, none of that is happening, and I was an asshole forever thinking that could be a thing.
Well,
like,
even
you know,
the main
you know what I'm
character
saying?
has
So,
a
like,
little bit of that. Like and was it 355? Is that her? 355 is one of
355 is one of the best characters to come out of
greatest-
fiction, and like when they finally adapt this, she is an amazing role for a woman of color, and I can't wait to friggin' see it. Make this thing already.
We were
It's
actually
been optioned 100 times.
We actually had a question at the very top, which was what would be your dream casting for the Why the Last Man, and mine is always really
No one is good enough.
Well, this is the thing is mine is always really like off-putting because I used to work as a casting director, so my answers are always people who go, oh, who? So like I was like looking up Jade. I can never pronounce her last name. Jade Ashidi is would be my
Huna?
Jade Ashidi would be my Kev 355, and
Nice.
then weirdly like.
I don't know her.
Because this guy named Dustin Milligan would be my Yorick in a
I'm
million
gonna Google
years.
them later.
Google them later. They're both fascinating. Yeah,
Excellent.
and I love actors who I love knowing actors who have not quite climbed on top of the pile yet.
who are working on it.
Oh yeah.
Who Brian came on
Oh,
circa
yeah.
2001.
Yeah.
So we've hit Y.
Yeah, thank you for letting me spend all that time on it.
No.
Oh, nice picture.
Oh, there we
Oh,
go.
nice.
This is what. It's so misleading to use one where she's wearing a dress.
So we've hit Y. We've hit Runaways. Do we want to dive into Saga? Do we want
I've
to?
got one more. I've got my personal favorite, which we've already covered a little bit in other episodes, but like is kind of a weird throwback, which is that because he's such a chameleon, and we've talked like someone brought up he has kind of a Kieran Gillen feel, and no, I can see like they're in the same universe.
They share like
There are some
fantastic
commonalities.
character dialogue and some pretty fabulous cliffhangers.
Kieran's a little more. I don't want to say punk rock because that's not right.
I think,
But he's a little more.
viewed with a historical lens, they will be members of the same writing generation.
Yes.
I think in that sense of like that they are both defining the last 10 years of comics for us, and hopefully the
But
next
I would
30,
never,
but-
I would never confuse a Gillen book for a Vaughan book. Like I would never walk in going, "Oh, really? Like Gillen wrote that? Really?" I would never.
Yeah, I'm trying to
So,
think like Young Avengers versus
here-
Runaways.
Yeah, very
Gillen-
different vibe.
Gillen, so in the same way that I would say Vaughan kind of is like very akin to Bendis, to me, Gillen is a little bit more like Morrison.
Yeah.
Where, like the punk rock, there's a little bit of like that sort of like spirituality to it a little bit. Like Vaughan has those elements, but he doesn't like hit them hard the same way that Gillen does.
I wish
Does that make
punk,
s- like,
yeah,
am
and
I-
like punk rock's not quite the right word. I feel like I'm dancing around it, which is it's a little bit more. There's a he Gillen grabs on so much harder to and this is gonna sound tawdry, but the glamour of youth, of how glamorous being young is, and being young is very glamorous. And
Tell
I
me
think-
about
I
it.
think Vaughan is a little bit more of an indoor kid. I mean, they're both indoor kids, but one's the indoor kid that was like spent his whole time, read a bunch and then joined some clubs and then went to college. And then Gillen's the kid who took a bunch of drugs. Went to clubs, took a bunch of drugs, and then went and started going to concerts and like going to big events and like had. They're two slightly different experiences. They're both on track and they both
and
know
they both
each
have
other.
similar styles of writing
And they're
like
intimate,
quippy
but-
dialogue and great character work, but
But there's a definite vibration difference, which is really fascinating. I just since someone brought that up. But yeah, I wanted to talk about Swamp Thing,
Okay.
which is
I love the
really
idea. We should just put Saga off for last.
Yeah.
I can't
Saga?
talk.
Saga.
Saga.
Yeah,
Saga.
that one.
Vox
Saga.
Machina.
Saga.
So the fast, and then we got plenty of time too, so we're doing really good. The Swamp Thing. I talked a little bit about this run of the Swamp Thing. I just went back and read the first two, and it's fun. This was back when they were kind of doing some interesting Vertigo prints, and the notion of creating. Of going back and getting this little thread of story from Swamp Thing where he had a daughter and she had kind of gone crazy, and so they had gotten rid of her, and he filled in this little chunk of story where Swamp Thing and his wife had basically, there was like this weapon created by the plants of planet Earth to wipe out all of humankind because we're terrible to them.
So The Happening.
Is that the plot of The Happening? I don't know.
I don't know either. It's like, oh.
It is.
So
Okay.
they kind of tried to like actually turn this weapon into a normal human by birthing it, which is very Swamp Thing.
Those who missed it, we did an episode where we talked a lot about Swamp Thing, which was our horror episode and our tribute to Bernie Wrightson,
yeah.
who co-created the character with Len Wein. It was notably, Swamp Thing was reinvented notably by Alan Moore. And from that point forward, because it slightly predates but was responsible in part for the creation of the Vertigo line we're talking about that ultimately gave a home to all these completely original things, Vertigo started with these sort of DC characters branching out to be their own little sort of paranormal and horror and suspense, sophisticated suspense was their early tagline, their own line of comics, which different people came on and off over the years post Alan Moore, one of whom, many years later, was Brian Vaughan.
In 2000.
This is 2000,
This was
yeah.
2000. And so what he did was, because Swamp Thing was kind of out of commission for a while, and it would be fun to sort of, try a reboot of the character. DC has done generational characters, I think, really well over the years. I wish
When
they
you say
would.
generational characters, how do you mean?
Meaning that there's the Golden Age Green Lantern like Alan Scott, who was the Green Lantern of the 1940s and 30s, and then there's the 1960s Hal Jordan, who was kind of the Green Lantern of the 1960s, and then in the 1990s we got Kyle Rayner, who is so like the idea
Also
that
Jon Stewart.
and oh god, thank you, Jon Stewart in the 80s.
So
Late 70s, early 80s?
I sort of miss Jon Stewart to be. I always feel bad because I jumped in right after Jon Stewart.
So let me ask you this.
They're also called Legacy Heroes.
Yeah,
Legacy
okay, that's,
heroes.
I was like, wait,
The
is
idea
different
that
from Legacy? What
the
am I
name
missing?
of the
Yeah.
character is more important than the person in the suit,
Yeah.
and I like that. I'm a big fan of that.
I don't know if that's...
I feel like it's more that it redefines
It
the
redefines
suit.
it.
Yeah.
But like, you don't need Hal Jordan or Alan Scott is not Green Lantern. They're a Green Lantern. Or the notion of even Bruce Wayne is Batman, but we can have a Batman that isn't Bruce Wayne, and that's really interesting. I love that. And I love that we can have a Swamp Thing that isn't Alec Holland, that we can see what happens when Swamp Thing isn't. I really dig that. And like that got me into comics on a certain level, because if Hal Jordan had been Green Lantern when I started reading Green Lantern, I wouldn't have read Green Lantern.
You know what? What's like your definition of legacy just kind of put in my head like a legacy character is a bit of an in canon what if. It's like, what if Swamp Thing was this? And now we have a whole other character that is Swamp Thing in canon. But two completely different characters based on a what if. It's kind of like, what if Captain Marvel was a girl? Like, and now we have Carol Danvers.
I really dig it. Yeah. And it's now we have all these stories that we can tell. And the thing about Teffe, so she was a baby. She kind of went evil because she was made out of this weapon. So at some point, like her parents came home and she had this weird flesh molding power. So they came home and she found gardeners like trimming the hedges and was so offended by the damage done to these trees that she just melded all the gardeners into one big hedge and killed them that way. And then they came home to their kid going, why did I do that? With like 12 dead people hanging from a bush. And they're like, okay.
Is this Brian K. Vaughan? I've never read
this
one.
This is Brian K. Vaughan.
Awesome.
And so Swamp Thing and his wife did what anybody in the Vertigo universe does when things go to shit, is they call John Constantine.
Yeah.
Like,
if it's not his fault, then he can probably help.
He can probably help. And he basically brings up the idea of they happen to kind of sort of know this family that has a kid dying of leukemia. And no one would know that the kid's going to be dead in 2 days, and no one would notice that they snuck into the hospital, kind of snuffed the girl out, and replaced her with their kid, changed her face to look like hers, and wiped her memory, sort of gave her the memories of this other kid. And just like basically did this like, okay, this is now, she's hopefully going to be fine because she thinks she's a normal girl and a different normal girl. And now she has normal parents, and they're just going to magically get their daughter that was going to die back, but maybe died a little sooner because of us. Because it's John, and John can do nothing that isn't awful. So, with that unbelievably fucked up origin,
I want to quit doing the show right now and go read that. Like, I'm just like, oh my god, I've got to
so
go read that
good.
right now.
Basically, this girl goes fine until her senior prom, and like something happens that makes her really angry, and she wakes up. And she doesn't quite know who she is or what she's doing, but she has a natural inclination to just kill things and value plant life over humans, and is not quite sure what's going on, and is now wandering around like a crazy person. And it's dark and horrifying. It's really scary.
Oh my god, so that makes it so hard to define Brian K. Vaughan's style, because that's
all
so
over the
not
place.
his typical.
His style is, I am good at comics.
Yeah, his style is, I'm good at and Teffe Holland is a really interesting character, and it's there's a little bit of Twilight Zone to it, and she is kind of the stranger who wanders into town, and she's this kind of like off-kilter, kind of cute girl, and then things go wrong, and then like you like later come into the bar, and everybody, all the humans that were in the bar have now been pruned, like physically, where she's just turned them into ficus trees out of meat and let them slowly die.
Jeez.
And is trying to figure out, and like the plant, and like the kingdom of plants, there's a thing called the Parliament of Trees, is trying to convince her that your whole point was always to give us a weapon against the humans, and that's who you should be, is you should just wander the earth and let people know that they can't fuck with us anymore. And she's not sure how and like she's kind of in the middle, and she's a little angry at her parents because she kind of gets a sense of what went down. She finds John at one point and has a conversation with him about what the fuck went down. And
I love that of all the Brian K. Vaughan books that we've all read, of course Taliesin gravitated towards Swamp Thing.
She is the angel of fucking death. She is such a great character. And all the horror that you love out of Swamp Thing is right there, and she's just a big, confused, violent mess, and it's really great.
Nice.
And it also takes place in like the South, which is, again, Swamp Thing. Again, comics and superhero comics in general are very New York centric, and it's anytime you get out of New York, I'm a happy camper.
Yeah.
Or any of the East Coast. Get away from the East Coast. I'm always happy with anything that doesn't happen on the East side of things. So.
Before we move on to Saga or anything else, is that all you wanted to say about Swamp Thing?
That's my Swamp Thing pitch for those who are and I have some questions from the audience before we. Did any of us read the Chamber miniseries or his Cyclops miniseries?
No. Chamber miniseries.
Wait, he did a Chamber miniseries?
He did a Chamber miniseries. I feel like I read it and I liked it, but it's been so long that I don't remember. But I'm going to go home and read that because I love Chamber.
I love Chamber.
It's hard not to love Chamber.
Chamber is such a weird
I love Cyclops
character.
too, although Cyclops
Chamber
is
is
very hit
from
and miss.
one of those teen books, the one that hooked me on comics.
Shoot Chamber.
Icons.
Give a. Who is Chamber?
Chamber is a moody British guy who's missing the lower part of his face because his mutant powers manifested, and there's sort of this weird plasma energy thing, but he can like psychically communicate with people. And he was the like emo, moody British hunk that my very favorite comic book characters crushed on in Generation X, an extremely 90s book
So 90s.
by
Yeah, it was like the 90s
Scott
answer
Lobdell
to
and
like New
Chris
Mutants.
Bachalo. Yeah, it was. Which
Yeah.
was funny. Like, Generation X was my first love, and then I went back and started reading New Mutants. Those were the books that, like, Baby Amy got really...
Baby
I
Amy.
seem to recall a Chamber action figure that they produced back in the 90s where you would like push a little button on his back. He had like a clear gold plastic front, and it was like one of those sparkers from like
Jonathan Starr's mom. I
It
did
would
not
just, like,
have
make
this,
a
and I'm
sparky
sad
thing.
about it.
What? So,
It was so
help
dumb.
me out.
Loved
What did this
Psychic
do
energy
anything?
kept it in place, but he could use it to sort
He
of
could
blast
shoot,
out
like,
at
right?
people.
Yeah. I thought so.
But
no
if you
face.
shut his powers down, like, yeah.
Just a hole.
He had
Yeah.
just a.
How
yeah.
to be dreamy with literally no chin.
How
Chamber.
very British. Sorry.
Oh.
That was called Icons Chamber. It was a 4-issue series from 2002 to 2003.
Chat, was it good? I'll read it either way.
We're gonna read
Yeah.
it, but like, and there was a Cyclops miniseries, which I'm down for. Although Cyclops is really hard to write.
Yeah.
He is, but he's lovely.
He is.
A bit.
And Chief has Cyclops.
There we
Of
are.
course, Chief has.
Oh, that's a
Cyclops.
really. Oh, and it's one of my favorite costumes too. So I'm excited.
It's interesting because
That's post new X-Men, right?
That's a
With
little
Grant
new
Morrison,
X-Men. Yeah. Big yellow X on black.
Vaughn has said that he never felt like he was as good at playing with other people's characters, like, where he was sort of like, I moved on to doing my own stuff because it turns out I was better at it, and other people are better at using these toys, even though I love superhero comics and I miss doing them. And I think partially that's just the modesty of any writer looking
Sure.
back on work from years ago, because he did a lot of great work with other people's characters, but it's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, like Brian K. Vaughan, the more I was like getting into him and researching for this episode, the more I was like, he just sounds like a guy I just want to go hug.
I've
Like,
met him a
and-
couple times, and he's just a dear, nice man.
Not
Like,
because he needs the hug, just to be like, I think you're great. Here's a hug. I don't know what else to do. Here's a hug. Like, yeah, like he just seems like that kind of guy.
All right. Well, so I'm going to lead us into Saga with a question from the audience.
Well, actually,
no, go ahead.
we can use the question, but we can also segue from being a nice guy, which is like part of the reason we got Saga, I think, is that he's just a nice man who like married an awesome playwright lady and had a couple kids, and then got an itch to sort of tell some stories about this other side of his life that had nothing to do with superpowers and had a lot to do with loving someone and starting a family.
Yeah.
And he was like, how can I do that in just the most comic book way possible? What if there is a crazy interplanetary war between different species and people on each side of it, not important people, just random like foot soldier types, somehow meet and fall in love?
So is Saga Romeo and Juliet in space?
A little bit.
A little bit.
I think it
It's
starts.
quite different
it
in that
starts there. I
They're
think.
both adults. So it's not this.
They're not like 12-year-olds.
No, and
They're certainly star-crossed,
Romeo and
though.
Juliet is definitely a story about teenagers.
Yeah.
So
That
And
would-
they definitely are star-crossed, but it's not so much like the Montagues and the Capulets, two families at war. It's two entire species who hate each other, have a very strong prejudice for hating each other at war with each other.
It's more of a Family Ties meets Alien Mind.
Well, then it's like if
There you go. That was the best I got. I don't know where I was going with that. Never mind.
If the
Scratch
two
that.
if the
Scratch
two
that.
lovers in
Oh.
question actually got the chance to run off together and then faced the big now what, that would also be like the.
It's a lot of now what.
Yeah.
It starts, and Saga has some mature content in it. It literally starts with a scene of childbirth,
Yeah.
which is amazing and memorable and beautiful, and just Brian Vaughan and his co-creator Fiona Staples, who has won all the awards for her art and deserves them. Like. Can win, thank you. This is the best. This is another of the
love
alien
Prince Robot.
species that we meet in Saga, because you'll run into this quote if I'm sorry.
There we are. That's everything I ever wanted.
I'm so happy
This
right
is
now.
everything. This is everything we ever wanted and everything
Oh my
we
god,
ever needed.
this is the best. because
this
it
is where
implies.
you live
Okay,
now, Matt.
here's a great thing. This is an alien species with sort of TV sets for heads, but their thoughts are reflected with what's on screen. So I am so trained by this book that my first impulse looking at this is to think, what does this reflect about Prince Robot and his mental state?
Yeah,
That
no.
he's picturing Matt Key. Because usually it's part of the storytelling is what images appear on that screen and why. I'm going to say bad things are going to happen to you because
Yeah.
Saga is all about heartbreak. It's not really, but it's very good at it. This is the best thing that has ever happened.
I know, I could stare at this forever. I'm highly entertained.
Saga is both like some of the most interesting science fiction you'll ever read and one of the most down-to-earth, like this is about loving someone and trying to make a family and relationships and being honest with each other, and like it's doing all of that while crazy mercenaries are hunting someone down to try to kill them, but you will fall in love with those mercenaries and you will fall in love with every minor character you meet along the way, and bad things will happen to some of them, and that will suck and you will cry, but you will be so happy that you are reading this book and you will desperately need the next
cleansing
volume.
tears. Cleansing tears.
Like, comic books don't make me cry on, like, typically, but this is one of the only books that's ever, like, brought me to tears, like, with some of the characters and what happens to them and what you find out about their background and stuff. Like, this is one of the most emotional books I've ever read, and I mean that in a very good way, in a very positive way.
At the same time that it has crazy, wonderful, like, I'm wearing Lying Cat, who is the sidekick of one of the mercenaries,
You may have
who's
to-
just a sort of alien creature. I'm gonna lean this way. No, I think
No.
I think my 2-shot shows the shirt. If the me and Tal shot. Nope.
Oh,
this
there we
way.
go.
There you go.
There we go.
Lying cat.
This is Lying Cat. He's a special kind of alien who can tell when you're lying, which is a
Just-
handy
just
thing to
as
have.
lying.
Is
if
compelled to say when you're lying.
Lying.
If I am lying and you're lying, Cat,
Lying.
I don't like my life. Like, lying. Like, oh, I do like my life. You're right, Lying Cat. Like, yeah.
It's so. Brian Vaughan's also said that like I'm sorry guys, I just get really
No,
excited.
you're
we
in.
love
You're in, 'cause
outside of you.
I'm way
Take it.
behind on this because it's such an emotional read that like I need to be at least
be ready.
80% to read it, and I haven't been 80% in a long time.
Yeah.
I do get this fear of like, I see someone on the cover and I'm like, please let nothing bad happen.
Yeah. No, I'm the same. I'm the exact same. Like, I'll start seeing like where an issue's going. I'm like, no.
But the book doesn't feel like it's being cruel. It's not. It is doing it to hurt us, but like it's not just like watch me torture your favorite people. Like it's this
There's a
story
purpose
that like
behind it.
there's going to be
Yeah.
consequences sometimes. Like not everything goes right all the time. But Brian Vaughan has said that in terms of this setting, this crazy space opera sci-fi setting, that like after working in TV for a couple of years, he had gotten too used to sort of mentally going, okay, but what can we afford? And he wanted to break himself of that. And so it's a quote that's oft repeated and sort of exaggerated because obviously, like, if they do finally adapt this, that will be fantastic. But he was trying to approach this book, or has said he was trying to approach this book in a way that would make it unadaptable.
Yeah,
Let me make
that's what I was-
something
yeah.
too crazy, too out there, too expensive, that nobody would touch with a 10-foot pole because I want to stretch my muscles of creativity. And the truth is that like his instincts are so sort of like they're enough classically straightforward that it's still like it's a linear narrative that you definitely could adapt if you just had like infinite money and time. So in that sense, but like it's given us a lot of just glorious creativity. A lot of which comes from his brilliant collaborator Fiona Staples, who, when he says make a weird monster, she goes all the way.
She goes all the way.
I feel like a lot of this wouldn't have been out of place in like the heyday of Heavy Metal magazine. Of like
Yeah,
just
it
really
feels like very much in line with that. But
a more
sort of-
mature
yeah.
in the actual definition of the
Or
word.
the European comics with
Yes.
a lot of sophisticated science fiction, which we're about to see in Valerian. We should do a European
Oh,
comic
I'm so
special.
excited!
sure.
Yeah, well, I
That-
brought my Inkle. I'm ready for some Jodorowsky, man.
Excellent.
I'll dive
I
into
gotta
that
finally.
shit.
I'll read some of those. And then
Yeah,
I'll-
There's
I'll have to
Old
read some.
Boy.
I'll have to read some.
I have one
Here's
here.
Persepolis. That one I know.
Yeah.
Okay,
d-
yep,
so
so
do we want to tell like the main characters? Do we want to give like the main pitch for Saga for those who haven't read it? Like, in terms of like what it's actually about, like, or have we already done that? Like, because I don't want to spoil anything, but I think if we just kind of give like a primer on like the first kind of 6 issues, like the first. What,
Oh man, the heartbreak and the twist start so early. But we can say who these people are.
Who are these people?
Yeah. All right. So we've got Marco is the dude with the ram horns. He is from a moon called Wreath. That's how I pronounce it. It's Wreath, right?
Yeah.
And they are at war with her people, the Lamphalians, that is a
planet called Landfall.
Elena, right?
Alana.
Alana.
I don't know how it's said, but I assume
Alana,
that.
yeah, it's probably Alana. You're probably right.
Which,
so it's Alana and
interesting
Marco.
coincidence, another amazing role for a woman of color when they someday do finally adapt this.
Oh,
Yeah.
And I think him as well. I think he's
Yeah.
Asian. He's not really Asian because he's an alien, but
like
I think-
based on that,
yeah.
in terms of the design. So Alana's people live on the giant planet below. His people live on the moon, and they've been at war for centuries. They hate each other. There's incredible prejudice. Her people have wings. His people have magic, and they hate each other. And they meet in the midst of war, fall in love, and make a baby
And you make
named
this
Hazel.
one, and she narrates the book, which is used to great and mysterious and
It's
confusing
amazing.
and heartbreaking effect. Like that's one area in which he is definitely experimenting. Is like what information you
Narration,
get
yeah.
and what context you place it in, and how that changes over time. These are things that Brian Vaughan is freaking master of at
And-
this point.
One of my
When she'll say
favorite-
something and you won't know what it means for 6 issues, even though you thought you did as soon as
Yeah.
you read it.
One of my favorite things that he does, and I'll just show, like, I don't want to give any context for this, but that last panel down there, right here, Fiona Staples writes that in her own hand. Like, it's not
Yeah.
written very pretty, but it's meant to look kind of like the journal of Hazel, and she's an adult telling this story.
We still don't know exactly like what age she's narrating from,
No.
which is an
Yeah.
interesting question.
Yeah, for all we know, she's 2 centuries old. We don't know how old they get, but or this is a year after the war happened and they've finally got peace. Or we don't know. We have no idea because it's still in the middle of the story. Like they're only what 60 in? Is it quite at 60? Is it 60?
In the 40s, where Volume 7 just came out. 7 times 6 is 42. Yeah.
Yeah. So
They're on a schedule that has been pioneered partly by books like this, which is sort of that they'll publish 6 issues, take a month off, they'll put a trade paperback out, collecting those last 6, they'll take another month off, and they'll come back. And this is how they've been able to. There are no fill-in artists on Saga. Fiona Staples draws it front to back, partly because they take time in between arcs so that she can stay on top of it.
Yeah.
And so that also means that every time a new collection comes out, you are now caught up, and if you want to switch to reading monthly, you can.
you can.
And the major advantage to doing that is A, always knowing what's going on, and B, that it has one of the most insane and delightful letter columns of any comic going. They do costume contests in the letters columns. They answer questions in a really surreal way. And Brian K. Vaughan's dog selects a winner every month of some random piece of junk from their office, which sounds ridiculous. Like, it's just really delightful. His dog's name is Hamburger. And Hamburger selects a winner each month, and he's like, "You get a used ticket stub from this film festival I went to." But you're deliberately, I
You're
know,
stuck in the TV.
I know. You deliberately get a piece of nonsense selected by Brian K. Vaughan's dog. I'm staring at an image of myself in a screen on a screen that
Yeah, that's
while I
what-
talk into a camera. There's a lot
That's
of
why I
like,
stopped
I was
looking
about,
at
I was
it.
about to,
narratives.
I was about to say, it's any
very-
moment now there's a nosebleed.
Yeah.
So their people.
There we go. That was great.
Their people are at war with each other. Then both planets discover that there was this relationship, that they are married,
this is
like
an
somehow it
ongoing,
gets out.
Certain people, one by one, have been finding out and have reacted in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people think it's great. Most people think it's
And
awful or an
and
abomination.
And a child between these two species has not really. It's not a thing that happens very often.
Never.
It's
Right.
never
Like,
happened.
what? No one would ever reproduce with a member of this other species.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it couldn't
Are you
happen.
kidding?
It's
Like,
impossible. Like,
yeah.
how did they
And-
not murder you? How was your
How did that
biology
even work?
able to handle their
And,
biology?
and yet it did.
and yet it
And
did.
yet it did.
And
A tiny baby.
and
side
tiny
note,
little
this is-
baby Hazel was born.
It's not like a book that you read because you're like, I want a romance, but it happens to contain like maybe the greatest love story in
Yeah.
comics. I don't
Since
know.
yeah, it's
Like-
my favorite. I will say it's my favorite couple since like the Addams Family. Like it's
Yeah.
it's like very much that level of you're both crazy and weirdly mature and immature, and I love every moment of it.
Yeah, and like they end up like.
They're not always good for each other, which is a really interesting thing, and they look at that very unflinchingly.
But like they are very much in love with each other and are constantly in orbit around each other, even when they're not close to each other, even when the adventure kind of takes them apart. Like, and there's
Puts them
this
back
constant
together.
like oh my God, how are they gonna find each other? They're so far apart. Oh, please get back together. And like when that happened, like, yay, they got back. Like it's like so emotional and like you're so invested. And I love it so much.
I cried at one of those. Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, like I don't want it's
we
hard
don't-
to
yeah,
talk
we
about
don't
this because we don't want to spoil anything, but
also their ship is a giant tree, and there's like a sort of ghost creature who becomes a close member of the family. There's all kinds of
If
crazy
any
out
of
there
this,
stuff.
yeah.
mixed
any of
with
this sounds
like-
exciting for you,
yeah.
you should be picking up this book.
Yes.
It's a great.
and it's very controversial. Like there was that one where like what was it? Apple didn't like
One of
Comixology.
their
Like,
issues
Well-
got taken down from the iTunes store because of something this guy had on his screen, which was expressing his psychology in the moment, but was expressing it with what was deemed obscene content, and got them taken out of the store.
Yeah, less.
Don't give this book to
less
kids.
controversial, more inappropriate. I think for
Sure.
inappropriate for the theoretical all audience, which I've never actually met before. I've never met anybody who's actually any of this stuff is actually inappropriate for. But I'm told they must exist.
yeah.
I probably wouldn't give this book to kids on account
No.
of there's nudity.
No, there's
But at 15,
a lot
at
of
15,
nudity,
you
but-
should be like, yeah, I mean, you know, as I'm trying
As a
to.
retailer, I don't endorse that, but as a human, yeah, you could.
I am of the philosophy, and this is I'm trying to remember the name. It was I believe it was Mr. Webster, creator of the Webster's Dictionary, who at one point at a party was approached by a woman who says, I just want to say we thank you for your decency and decorum for leaving all of these inappropriate words out of the dictionary. And to which he responded, well, then how do you know them? So, which always made me quite pleased.
that is a wonderful anecdote.
We're thinking about. I have a great book about the history of the dictionary that I will plug on a future
Oh,
episode.
nice.
So yes.
That
that
does
sounds
not
great.
surprise me in the least, Taliesin.
I
You
know.
of course have read that and have it.
No,
and-
it's Simon Winchester is an amazing man who writes these really ridiculous, sugary treats for intellectuals. It's great.
So Saga's is an image comic. Now, like Brian Vaughan has gone fully solo, fully creator-owned. It's been going since 2012. There
Yes.
are 7 paperback collections, and
It's won awards countless times,
All
as
of
we
them.
already started with. Yeah,
I think it's
Again,
up for
it's
another
the-
one.
it's up for
probably
several more this year.
wouldn't surprise me.
And they're like, again, this has become a gateway comic because even if you don't think you're into comics, you might very quickly get hooked on these two and need to know
Well,
what happens.
Like we said in the Image episode, this is the book where I was like, oh my God, I've got to read so much more Image. This is amazing.
I'll say that we've already discussed 3 solid gateway books, which are Why the Last Man, Runaways, and Saga, are all 3 really solid. And by gateway book, a book you can hand to somebody who's never really gotten into comics, and it's going to be something they can just immediately sink their teeth into, and it may become their favorite book.
And that's why I say his writing style is very accessible. It's not
Very
like if you were to
accessible.
give someone a Grant Morrison book, is
Ooh.
like it'd be like
For some
what?
people, that's a perfect beginning. For others, they would
Yeah,
have
that's like-
difficulty grappling
This is
with
very
it.
like
That's
I
a
feel like
person
this
you
is
know,
kind of
but
like
this is anybody.
very much like I hate to say like people pleaser, but it is like it's
difficult
across
to
the
talk about without it sounding like we're belittling the book in some way. But like, it can both be one of the richest, most satisfying things I've ever read, and just bizarrely and stunningly accessible to newcomers.
Yeah.
There are people who only own Why the Last Man is the only comic book they own. I know people who Why the Last Man is the book they own on their shelf, and they own maybe some Sandman, and that's it. They're not comic fans, but they are Why the Last Man.
My
fans.
like retail mission in life is getting those people and being like, here's a thing you might like.
So
But-
somebody was asking what he's been working on recently beyond Saga, and I think that leads really nicely, if we want to, into. So what's Brian doing these days?
Well, I know that he's got
Well, that's-
Wants to
Paper
talk
Girls,
Paper Girls.
and he's got Private Eye. Private Eye he's not working on any longer. That was just a 10.
This
10
is a
issue
different.
thing.
This is its own wing because I want to talk about his work with Panel Syndicate.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I will pull this out
let's-
and we will save that.
Let's start with Paper Girls.
I've only read the beginning of Paper Girls. Side note, it's friggin' amazing, and he's working with another of my favorite artists of all time, Cliff Chang, on this. But who's further along than I am?
I've only read the first trade. I haven't read the second.
I'm only one trade in 2.
Okay, well, we
so-
all need to catch up on Paper Girls.
But it is so amazing. It is so good. And like I started again. It was another book that I wanted to start and just hadn't had time to. And then when the Eisner's thing came along, I was like, oh, good, an excuse to actually like. I'm now getting paid to read Paper Girls, and it's great. It's fantastic, and it's
very Spielberg, right? It's
very Spielberg. That's a good way to put it. And
we sold a lot of these to people who wished that there were Stranger Things comics.
Yeah.
this past summer,
this is very much a Stranger
yep,
Things kind of
perfect.
comic.
Kids on bikes.
Paper Girls is literally about some girls who deliver papers, and then
neighborhood,
everything gets
yeah.
weird.
And it deals with like time travel. Like I don't want to give too
It
much
gets
away.
it gets
but
very
Set in the 80s, at least at first. But
yeah, it gives like very Spielberg.
yeah, this is like Brian K. Vaughan is like, you know what I really like?
Lucas.
Spielberg, Goonies, like 1980s
Explorers.
teenage films. I'm
Yeah.
gonna write that as a comic book in the 80s because it's a comic book and I can. So like,
And so
Yeah.
if you're really fiending for some Stranger Things vibe, it filled that hole for me really really well. Where I'm like, I love these kids.
the first issue had something that you could mail in to like officially get your like letter carrier, your newspaper carrier
Wait, did
badge.
it really?
Yeah.
Yes, I didn't do it and I should
Oh,
have.
I
I
wanted to-
regret it.
why didn't I not do that?
It's
I
only
didn't
14
even know
issues in.
about
There are
it.
only 2 collections so far of Paper Girls. Klitschang was already one of my favorite artists, and it's delightful. Oh, that's wonderful.
I love
That
it
was
so
And
much.
it's yet another really really accessible book. There are a lot of very accessible books, and it's
Oh, this is the second one.
Again,
I'm
he's
spoiling
also
this for
stretching his
myself.
like weird stuff muscles on this, which is great.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I love about Brian K. Vaughan, again, is that like he unabashedly goes for it. He's like, "Nah, I'm gonna do that. That's what I'm gonna go do, and if it offends some people, then we're gonna have a conversation about it, and they'll understand why."
Girls
I
on bikes.
put it
with
in.
flashlights.
Like we
Like,
also we said
walkie-talkie.
we contrasted him to Hickman earlier in terms of sort of dense, weird like mythology and symbolism stuff, but like he's doing that in Paper Girls.
He's doing that
So
in
once
Paper
again, there is
Girls.
no Brian Vaughan style. It's just
It's
He
just
does it all,
everywhere.
and he does it all real well. You know, and he does it all through character dialogue and panel. Like,
and
yeah, like it's
and really small stories with large scope ideas behind them, and like that's also the other thing that I get from so many of his books is that his characters are interesting and his worlds are interesting, but not necessarily because of each other. He's not writing about Superman. Superman is one of the things that makes the DC universe interesting. The characters in Saga are not what make the Saga universe interesting. The Saga universe would be interesting with or without
you
them.
fall in love with both of them separately.
Yeah,
Like,
but they're just interesting people in an interesting world,
Yeah.
as opposed to the people that are defining. This is not the story of Alexander the Great. These are just people trying to live their lives. It's really great. The Paper Girls, again, they're just teenagers. The Runaways are just, even in the world of superheroes, the Runaways are the bottom of the totem pole. They are the last thought. Even amongst teenage superheroes
Yeah.
of the Marvel Universe, the Runaways
But what's great is
barely
they're also
count.
hoping that you don't pay attention to them because
Yeah.
they are trying
They're
to
trying to
fly under the
hide, yeah.
radar and stay.
And they are the bottom of and like that is the story of the people at the bottom of the barrel, and it's really interesting.
but like one of like
But
it's
then he turns around and he writes about the mayor of New York.
And that story actually is singular in itself. Although again, there's this larger narrative that's happening about who he is and why he is why he has the power that he does. That's almost completely disconnected from his daily life. He's like this larger narrative of why he exists, and he's almost like viciously ignoring it. Like he's putting effort into like putting this part of himself as far away as possible. There's a weird shame in the character that's constantly
well,
pressing.
and I think it kind of comes from the fact that he doesn't actually know where his powers come from. He just knows that he has them, and there's also that whole element of like that one thing that happened that
he does not feel comfortable about.
yeah,
And
and that's like a mystery sort
He's
of.
a
that
very
goes with the
uncomfortable
book, that
human.
One thing that happened, yeah.
and he's uncomfortable about every part of his life, and is so, and because of the nature of his job is so scrutinized that he's kind of a mess.
Going back to something that you said about like people at the bottom, but like not inspiring, like not like directly affecting the universe. Like both are interesting in and of themselves. That's one of the things about Saga that I think is done so well. It's a massive, gigantic universe, and it handles very well in that it's like, what's out there? We don't know. Like all of the stuff that's in that book could exist. Like it's wacky and out there, but like very human and censored and stuff like that. But like, it's such a creative universe. And someone in the live chat earlier on Facebook asked if you could have a spin-off a character spin-off from Saga, what would you want? And I was like, almost every single one of them could do a good spin-off. Like you could do like the mercenaries, like the Will. Who was the one that I just met most recently?
The brand?
The brand, yeah. Like you could have them like fighting each other, or, like teaming up and going off to find another like mark. Like
Because it's a big universe.
it's a massive universe.
And he's interested in all the people in it. That I guess there's
Yeah.
a trademark Brian Vaughan trait is empathy, for sure. Like he's always interested in the characters may be cruel towards each other, but he is sort of incapable of willful cruelty towards them. In the I mean not
And there's a
not in the
difference.
sense that terrible things won't happen, but in the random person in the background, Brian Vaughan is aware that that person has a story. And we might eventually get that story. That's the kind of thing that interests him. There might be like a one-shot about
there's-
random dude in the background later.
There are no cardboard people.
Yeah, it's or at least that's
They all have
a
dimension.
goal of his, or that's something that comes through in his writing.
Yeah.
Is that like that's what makes the world interesting to him, I think.
The other thing that I like about Saga with his relationship with Fiona is that one of the things he'll do is go to her and say, "Hey, what do you want to draw? Like, what's the thing that you want to draw?" And I remember one of her answers was like, "I don't really like baby seals." He's
Is that where Goose comes from? Ah, I love
because
Goose.
she was like, "I just want to. Can I draw a baby seal?" He's like, "Yep, I'll write that character for you." There you go. She's like,
Yup.
I want to draw a walrus. Done. Here it is. I wrote it for you. Go have fun with that.
Zach, can you pull up a picture of Goose? G-H-U-S.
GHUS.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna.
I don't know how to
I'm
say
just
his name. I
gonna,
just say Goose.
We've
I
had
always
some
said
wonderful
Gus,
comments.
but-
Yeah, sorry,
by the
guys.
way, it's okay.
I cut off your transition question.
These are not even what we answered it. So
Okay.
there were like people said, "What do you mean I have a conversation with my coffee machine every morning?" Do you see what you mean? Yes, that's fair. Yeah, and it's the if superheroes are such upstanding citizens, why don't they all become congressmen, senators, and presidents? Kind of answered your own question there. No, but there actually are a lot of interesting stories about that, and they go both directions, where both superheroes and villains. And actually, at some point, we're going to talk about Prez,
Yes.
which was a book about the teenage president. There were President
yep.
Prez.
There have been
I'm
several
not familiar
incarnations
with
of it.
this.
It's a DC thing.
It's amazing.
I thought Neil Gaiman made it up because he referenced it. He did a story with it in Sandman, and
Which
then
was
found out
great.
I was wrong. He was
Oh,
using
no.
real existing DC lore, and since then there has been a reinvention of Prez that I adored.
There's been
from last year.
there was the one immediately after, which was Smells Like Teen President, which
That one
was
I haven't
very
read.
weird. And then that was a kid whose mother claims he was the illegitimate child of Prez,
Oh my gosh.
traveling the U.S. It was very weird. And then there was the one, Prez is a fascinating notion, and I'm really amused by the whole notion.
And
of
originally
it.
it was just a gimmick comic based on the fact that they changed the voting age in the late 60s.
Yeah.
And so there was this sort of fear of like, well, the teens, it's the 60s, the teens have so much power. Like, I bet that now that they have the vote, they'll change their, not that they thought this was likely, but like, that this was what was in the air
speculative
culturally
future,
with
sure.
like, the next logical step is that now that they can all vote, they'll change the requirements for being president, and we'll get like a
An
cool,
18-year-old.
like an 18-year-old running for president and winning like on a wave of 60s sort of idealistic whatever. It goes in
a
interesting
comic book
directions.
about it.
Yep. Why not?
Speaking
so
of, there's now like a campaign to get The Rock to run for president, which I think is kind of
That's about as 21st century
great.
as we.
Like,
I breathe deep on all of this.
so funny.
Let's see. We have
He
a
is
whole
on
bunch
my
of
list of people who are
off-topic-
not allowed to turn out to be jerks.
Yeah.
No, I'm always worried about meeting
Yes!
anybody I
Goose!
respect. There we go. What is happening?
Goose
Like,
and Friendo.
It's such a like wonderful universe that's like fleshed out with like
There's horrifying monsters in it, but there's also this guy.
there's also this guy and he's kind of a badass. That's what's so fun about it is like he's a very loyal, very
He wears
protective.
a little fisherman's hat.
And fisherman pants.
Yeah.
Because he's afraid of his legs getting wet.
I love it.
This is the same book that has just like the grossest stuff you'll see, and like a wonderful, very memorable character who's like a spider lady that like will give you all kinds of visions of different kinds.
Oh yeah.
She's terrifying.
She's terrifying.
but
in
like-
the
but
best
like
way.
sexy, terrifying.
yeah, like
no, I feel you.
strangely sexy, terrifying, and a great character.
Yeah.
And it's there's a lot. There's a
There's a
lot to
lot.
unpack in Saga.
We just came back to Saga again.
We did. Well, I mean that's okay because we're talking about Paper Girls and we're talking about all this, and we have a lot of questions that are
briefly
not
hop into
that are
Panel
not on Pample.
Syndicate.
Do it. Panel Syndicate.
Yes, let's do
we got
Panel
time.
Syndicate and then
More,
we'll take a few
more
questions.
works and more experimentation. Brian Vaughan, I should have looked up some of the like whether he started this art or who he's working with on it. But Brian Vaughan also started publishing some like digital only comics. He teamed up with his Doctor Strange the Oath collaborator Marcos Martin to do a book called Private Eye. And the reason this book looks so weird is that this was a digital comic designed to be read on screens. And for years, this was, I don't know, 2013 to 2015 maybe, they were insisting that this book would be digital only and would not come to print. Robert Kirkman over at Image, creator of Walking Dead, eventually wore him down. And they did an exchange where they did a print edition of Private Eye. And in exchange, there is a digital-only Walking Dead story that Brian Vaughan wrote. One thing that I want to shout out immediately, if this book interests you, Panel Syndicate books are pay what you want. Which I don't know whether we made a call on this, but I was proposing that at some point I would love to read Private Eye with all of you because it's pay what you want.
Yeah.
So I think 12 issues is what it ultimately went. They released it online digitally. It
10.
is the
It's
10. Thank you. It is the story. I'm just gonna. Let's see.
Oh no, you do it.
Yeah, I only read the first 3 issues of this.
I'm gonna steal the summary off the back. Years after this is about a like. We are currently in a privacy, boundaries are coming down with the internet and all of this stuff, and we're sort of in this like nobody really has any. This is about a society where that all sort of catastrophically exploded, and now not only is it's the opposite of our current sort of Instagram and Facebook age, it is actually illegal to take a picture of somebody else. Privacy like has gone back so much further the other way that this guy makes his living like Private Eye, like he's illegally looking up your old high school girlfriend, because that is against the law now, and it's because at a certain point the digital cloud burst. Years after the digital cloud bursts and exposes all of our most confidential hopes and fears, the Private Eye is set in the inevitable future where everyone will have a secret identity. Following an unlicensed PI as he's thrust into the most important case of his life, this sci-fi mystery explores the nature of privacy with frightening prescience. Because this was, this book was being written right as all of this stuff is sort of playing out on the world stage, and it's a result of a lot of Brian Vaughan's sort of questions and ideas about where things are going. So what I love is that, like, you meet sort of an old person who's essentially one of us, who's like weird and old-fashioned, covered in tattoos, and like clearly just like imagining into the future, like what will our assumptions be? He's still trying to, I think, like use his broken iPhone from like 2 decades ago, and they're like, Dad, that doesn't connect to anything.
It doesn't connect to
Stop.
anything.
Like you're an old man. And it's like so I haven't finished it. I've only read the beginning, which is part of why this is.
We may have
take
to all
that
read it together.
Grain of salt, but like it is available for pay what you want in a ton of different languages from panelsyndicate.com. They have a new one called Barrier that we should look at as well.
All right.
It's not that new. It's like a year and a half old now, but new on our time scale.
Yeah.
These are some of the places that what is Brian Vaughan up to these days? A lot of really interesting experiments.
Yeah.
Something else I should mention as well. Paper Girls is currently on sale on Comixology.
Nice.
Oh, is it?
For $3.99. $3.99
Nice.
on
For like
Comixology.
volume 1?
I believe it's volume 1 for
Okay,
$3.99.
yeah,
So
sorry.
you get like
I was
a,
just like, the book is only $2.99. That's not a sale.
It's
I got
on
confused.
sale by meaning it's $1 more. Yeah, it's just for the slightly more than the cost of a single issue. I think you get 6 issues out of that. So that's a
5, maybe?
yeah 5 or 6 is
5 or
usually
6.
the standard.
Whatever. It's a bargain.
You get a book.
And there's a new single issue of it out today.
Yes.
Oh. Also, before we start taking all the questions, I wanted to throw a shout out to Pride of Baghdad.
I still
my
need to
God.
read that one.
Thank you.
It is like it's been a couple years since I read it, but it is
find a
about.
copy.
I think it's so obviously in Baghdad. The zoo, like it's the siege of Baghdad. I think like in the early '90s, like Operation Gulf War, whatever that was.
Is it set in the first or second Gulf War?
I think it's the
First.
first. I believe
Okay.
it's the first. So it was early '90s, and the zoo is bombed, and the animals get out, and the story is about this pride of lions just trying to survive the battle of these humans fighting each other.
It's a beautiful book.
It is a beautiful book. It is heartbreaking.
There we go.
Oh
Nico
my god!
Henriken.
It like
There we go. I
this
couldn't
is
remember
another
that
book
name.
that made me cry. Like Brian K. Vaughan makes me cry on a pretty regular basis.
There we go.
I
That's
guess.
his
It
style.
didn't- it
We'll
didn't
make you
occur to
cry.
me
We'll make you
until-
happy
but yeah, a
that
lot of
you are crying.
And
I'm
but it's
crying.
because like he finds a way to make you invested in these characters on a very deep emotional level, and then before you know it, like something terrible happens to one of them, and you're like, but no, not that character. That's the one that I love. And then you realize that that's what you would say to all of them.
Yeah.
And he
They
does
are
that
all-
consistently in every single book. So like when there is like a betrayal of the team or of the relationship or a death or whatever. No, not that character. That was my favorite. You're saying that for all of them.
Yep, they're all your favorite.
They're all your favorites.
Right, Kayvon, they're all your favorite.
Zil, Safa, Noor, and Ali are the four lion or the lion pride that wander around, and it's so good. It's so
It
good.
is very good. It's very, very good. It's just like that one. I think it was just the book. I think it was just an actual just graphic. I don't think it was
standalone
released
graphic
in
novel.
issues that they
As far as I
collected.
understand.
Amazing.
Frankenstein 1912 says, "What genre or idea would you like to see Ryan Kayvon tackle in the future?" I'm always a fan of cosmic horror personally.
I would love to see like an eldritch horror, like Lovecraftian,
which like Ex Machina
occult.
kind of does a little.
But like, I would love to see him tackle that
full on.
from panel 1, like, because like Ex Machina.
It's so.
I just can't say
so
it.
proud of
I
you.
cannot say it right.
I'm so proud of you.
It builds to that. But like, I would love to see page 1, panel 1. There's like this sacrifice going on, like in a deep, dark dungeon of some sort, like, and it's to summon an elder god. I want to see that.
Runaways? More Runaways?
No, I just. Like,
Oh,
No, but like that takes it in a completely
it
different
does.
direction.
It does. I just had to laugh.
No, but thank you.
They do tag that. But
I'm worried. Like, if he takes on cosmic horror, I'm worried it'll be because he's literally having like a total despair midlife
Existential
crisis thing,
crisis.
and like I don't want that to happen to him.
No.
Because
I
he's
want,
he's the
like-
writer that we want to hug.
I don't know. Maybe that will be the experience of raising a toddler, and he'll write a whole book.
He's got
about
like it's really
Squid
interesting.
monster.
He has talked about that Saga does not currently have a planned ending because it is the story of a family, and he's got a family, and he hopes that has no ending. So it's one of those like
It's an
that'll
ongoing-
be interesting to see how that plays out. Like he probably, I assume, there at some point there will come an ending, and I don't know whether he's just like does actually know what that is and just isn't telling us because he doesn't want to let us down or whatever, or if he's really just going to keep going until he runs out of
I
stories.
mean,
to tell.
he said he has a planned ending for it.
Oh, okay. I think I read something different.
He said he has an idea for where he knows he wants it to go. He just doesn't
probably
know
just
how
know
long
when
it's
he's
going to
gonna
take to
get
get
there.
there.
Ah.
So he's planning to meander until he's like, I'm kind of done telling this story. I better start winding it down. You know. So that's what I took away from what I read about it.
That makes sense?
I will say we have a little bit more time, and we have a lot of off-topic questions.
Okay.
Sure, we can
And
do that.
like, do we want to maybe do something about the Eisner? Like, we could talk about maybe I don't know. Do you want to host next week, or do you want me to? Okay, you host next week, so you get to pick what we do. Fine.
I'm super. If you guys, it's gonna be like a lot of names, but we'll talk a little bit about the Eisners and go over some of the nominations that just came out. Pick a couple that we think you might be particularly interested in, and then.
Well, I mean, like, there's so many topics because we can talk about Will Eisner himself and who he was. We can talk about how the awards work, and then there's so many good books that have been nominated.
Well, and another thing that we could do is like take it almost like category by category, choose like our top 4 favorite categories, and next week focus on best limited series and go over all of those,
worst-
and then the
worst
week
case scenario.
after do
have a
best
guest.
ongoing.
We can maybe try and get a guest.
Yeah.
We do have a guest that would be appropriate
So-
for one of these.
That would be
Just
fun.
saying.
Okay,
And we
so
could do
some
like a
sort
month of Eisner.
Eisners.
The,
Eisner month. The month of Eisner.
yeah,
I-
I
Just
came up with
Just a thought.
I already have a bad title, but yeah, we'll work on it.
Fantastic. Done. I like the idea of spacing them out because there are a lot of categories
Yeah.
in it, but like we can spend some time talking about it next week.
Yeah, and Comic-Con, we got a little while towards Comic-Con, and that'll be
And
fun.
then we can talk a little bit about the other awards as well, like the Harveys and
Harvey's and
whatnot.
yeah. What was the one that Sandman won that they actually had to change the rules because
World Fantasy Award.
yeah, the World Fantasy Award was like no more comic books.
Yep. When you win an award and they get embarrassed and they change the rules so comics aren't eligible anymore, that goes on your tombstone.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
that's-
Wait, I don't know this story. What happened?
Oh,
An issue of Sandman won, and it's probably not as pithy or simple as it gets told now, but this is the way the story gets told. An issue of Sandman from Volume 3, Dream Country, the Shakespeare one, actually won a World Fantasy Award for Best Short Story, I believe. After which the rules were rewritten so that graphic novels and the content
they
wasn't
embarrassed
eligible.
because a comic
Because
book
it wasn't
won?
a story. Yeah.
I don't think
They-
it was embarrassed. I think it was more that especially in that community can get a little quippy, and I think they just got a little like, well, I mean, technically, and I think they got a little.
Were they embarrassed though?
Probably.
Get at me, World Fantasy
Probably
Award
a
people.
little.
Were you like, and in theory, like now with Saga competing for Hugos and things like the questions of whether things should be in separate categories by medium is a totally valid question.
It is.
But I love that, like, historically, in fact, an issue of a comic won a short story award, and they got embarrassed and rewrote the rules. Like,
So funny.
To sum up, yeah, more or less. I mean, like, it was one of those things where staring at the whole mess at the time made me just kind of giggle a lot.
see, I didn't know the story till later. Were you following it while it happened?
Oh yeah, I was watching and I was giggling. Like
Okay,
a
so
schoolgirl.
correct any, like...
No, I mean, like there were a lot of different voices being heard, and we don't quite know why everything went. You'll never know quite why everything went down, but that community in general is a little stuffy, especially because I think science fiction gets so much crap from real fiction,
Right.
Which is such
You
a
turn around and build walls against
that you
whatever the
that you
next
build walls
level
like
down is.
no, we're real fiction. That on the other hand,
Right.
is sort of passing the buck down a little.
And this was
bit.
years before Neil Gaiman was also an acclaimed novelist, where now, like, most people would not be embarrassed to give an award to Neil Gaiman for pretty much anything.
No, he had a famous quote of like being at a party and like telling people that he wrote comic books, and then they're like, oh no, you wrote Sandman, you write graphic novels. And he's like, it's like being told something. Oh no, you're a lady of the evening. He's like, oh. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
All
feel
right.
much better now.
Excuse me.
Lady of the evening.
It's like it's like being no, I stand corrected. Some questions that are a little off topic. The writer, that's their handle, asks us what we think about Wiccan, and I assume they mean the Marvel character Wiccan. I love Wiccan. Wiccan, for those who don't know, is a character from another Marvel team book, the Young
Alan
Avengers.
Heinberg and Jim Chung wrote a book called Young Avengers, which was yet another, like, group of new teens you haven't met before, and another book that I fell madly in love with.
Yes, and Wiccan has a great character arc that goes through two different iterations of that super team.
The second iteration of Young Avengers, there were a couple different runs by those original creators. The next people to take over that book were a certain Gillen and McKelvey.
And
so
killed
because
it.
we are unpredictable, we don't like it at all.
No, not at all.
You turned me onto that book.
Oh, yeah, well,
I remember
Wiccan
talking
is-
with you about it a few years ago, and you were like,
Yeah.
"You've got to be reading this," and I was like, "Yeah, I'll pick it up." Oh my god!
And,
Yeah.
I like that Wiccan is also kind of Doctor Strange Jr. these days. I kind of dig that
And
they're
I
pushing
think
in that
He's
direction.
got sort of magic-based powers.
Magic-y.
He's
And a really adorable romance with Hulkling.
It is
yeah,
very cute.
They're
They're-
adorable.
I
gay
love
and
playing. I love playing them in tandem on Lego Avengers.
Is that a thing?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Lego.
Oh, Lego
they're both
Avengers.
they're both in Lego Avengers.
Lego
video game,
Avengers is a deep,
and
dark
I
pit
love
of fandom.
to just choose both of those characters and run around New York City with them. I'm like, oh, catch up, Hulkling here. Okay, let's go over here now. Yeah,
It's way too much fun.
yeah. So I didn't. Did I break you?
No!
That and the Ant-Man
Oh, and you can fly on Antony.
well, and then you can get narrated.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. His best friend narrates. It's really good. It's way too much fun.
It's there's Lego Marvel and there's Lego Marvel Avengers, and Marvel Avengers I think is where you can play both of them.
There's
They're
also
both
Miss,
great games.
and the canon goes deep on
Marvel's
the
in it?
Marvel.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got a
They
Miss
go
Marvel.
deep
It's
on
yeah.
the Lego stuff. There's like over 120 playable characters that you can collect.
Ashley
It's-
Birch, I think, is the voice of Miss Marvel. She's so cute.
Yeah.
It's so cute.
It's the best. It's the best. What was the question?
Young-
Wiccan.
Yeah.
Didn't Wiccan come from House of M?
I thought they originated in the Heinberg Chung Young Avengers.
Well,
They're probably roughly
technically,
contemporaneous.
Scarlet
Witch is his mom, right?
Okay.
Am I thinking the
Whoa.
right
He
one?
may
Yeah.
have originated in. So
Oh,
he's
boy.
connected to the events of House of M.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's where the character first appeared.
Technically, he's a baby, but didn't really count because that baby
So-
didn't really have a.
See,
period.
like his
Poor Scarlet
his
Witch
actual
has been through some
origin,
shit.
yeah.
is a little. His origin is very murky because he's not a real
Because
boy.
I've always associated him with he was the baby in House of M that Scarlet Witch was like, no, you will not take my baby, and then
he is.
no more mutants happened. That whole alternate universe.
But that
stuff.
happened-
The
that
thing
actually
was, she
happened
had
earlier.
lost those babies years ago.
Gotcha.
That was the
earlier.
deal with
Okay.
House of M. Is
okay.
that like
Oh, boy.
she had some babies and then she did not have babies anymore, but not in the normal way that
Yeah,
happens.
Because Scarlet Witch, and
Because
nothing can be
comics
normal with
and Scarlet Witch.
poor Scarlet Witch.
Poor Scarlet Witch. So there, he is connected to her in ways that relate to the events of House of M,
Yeah.
but it's not, that book didn't like create
As
him,
the
as
as the
I
audience
understand
stares at
it.
us in horror and wonder, Scarlet Witch in the Marvel books has reality-changing powers. She can basically alter reality. It's not just little psychic things like the movie. I get why they changed it. Oh my god.
Yeah.
In the comic books, at one point, she decided that she and the Vision had kids. She and the Vision
Well, okay,
had children.
first she did have kids, and then someone later decided that she had
that
kids.
she didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big
It's a mess. It's a
Sometimes
mess.
sometimes building on other people's ideas goes really well.
Goes really well,
And other
sometimes
times it's a mess.
But the nice thing is they did make really nice ice cream out of this, which is that eventually then she decided, no, I really did have kids, and they kind of got these, like, she spontaneously created these two twins that are her children that ended up being Wiccan and, is it Speed? I can never remember.
Not Speed.
I think his name is
yeah,
just
it is
Speed.
just Speed.
Yeah.
It's just Speed.
But we don't meet him for a
for a
while.
while.
And there's a big question of, like, are you really, though? Like, so that's where the origin's getting murky
Gets a
thing comes
little
in.
murky, but like they're definitely, and like they have their own parents, but they're actually the souls that were kind of like broken free when this all went down, and the reality kind of reasserted itself in kind of this horrifying
And this
way.
is part of the basic premise of Young Avengers, that initial Alan Heinberg, Jim Chung run. Part of that premise was that each of the new characters they made up was connected to or inspired by one of the classic Avengers. So since Scarlet Witch and Vision were classic Avengers, like they kind of
Created.
and Scarlet Witch's brother is Quicksilver, like they had like each of these new ones were heirs to them. I will shout out, because you never know where your characters are going to go, one of the other Young Avengers was connected only loosely, like they hung a lampshade on how loose this connection was, to Hawkeye. And she is also Hawkeye, and her name is Kate Bishop.
And she's
a huge
awesome.
deal now, and that is the best thing in the world, because that's when it goes well, that you put something out into the universe and other writers pick
will-
up on it and do brilliant
We will
stuff.
cover Kate Bishop later because I'm a huge Kate Bishop fan as well. Bring us out, sir.
Well, that's been our episode about Brian K. Vaughan. I hope that you enjoyed our saga through Brian K. Vaughan's journey.
Very nice.
Next week, we'll be talking about the Eisners in some capacity. We will figure that out off the air, and then we'll let you know how you should prepare. But in the meantime, I have been and will continue to be Matt Key.
This is comics. Who knows who will be at any
Yeah.
given time?
Yeah.
But I'm Amy Dallen.
And I'm being retconned into Taliesin Jaffe that you can find at Executive Goth on Twitter, Instagram, and whatever system.
Oh yeah, the
Thanks
Matt
to
Key.
Ken Wynn for this beautiful
Ken Wynn for Prince Robot.
Prince Robot.
For giving us this funny thing to play with. It was great.
And thanks, Brian K. Vaughan.
And thanks,
for
Brian K. Vaughan.
everything.
And thanks for being the Wednesday Club and giving us a place to come on Wednesdays. Bye. We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.